Chapter 1520. Looking at the crowd not far away, Shwe hesitated for a moment and sighed. Forget it, I'll listen to you this time. However, fellow Daoist Shwe has to be responsible for I. What? Xiao Hua was stunned and thought to himself, these words, don't they have some other meaning? These words were very ambiguous. After Shwe finished speaking, she immediately came to her senses and said hesitantly, if there's danger, those cultivators will only care about their own safety. Who would care about I? It's better to obediently walk at the back. Tilda, since fellow Daoist Shwe understands, that's good. Xiao Hua nodded and then looked to the left. The two of them weren't the only smart ones. About 10 meters away from them, there were also dozens of cultivators who were either crossing their arms, standing with their hands behind their backs, or floating in the air. They were all coldly looking at the people flying in front of them. Fellow Daoist Xiao. What should we do? Shwe also looked and asked in a low voice. Act according to the circumstances. Xiao Hua smiled mysteriously. Act according to the circumstances? Isn't that the same as not saying anything? Shwe pursed her lips and clapped her hands. She took out some yellow talismans from her storage pouch and handed them to Xiao Hua. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. You're acting like you're very profound. But, as soon as these words left her mouth, Shwe felt some regret. It seemed she still hadn't figured it out. Xiao Hua was now a late-stage 10th layer Qi refining cultivator, not the low-level 4th layer Qi refining cultivator she saw before. How could she be so impudent? Fortunately, Xiao Hua didn't care and also didn't notice Shwe's gaze. He looked at the yellow talismans handed over and took out 2, saying, Flight talismans. I don't need them. You can use them yourself. Ah! Shwe opened her cherry lips slightly and her mind spun rapidly. If he doesn't need the flight talisman, doesn't that mean he knows the flight technique? The flight technique. How could a 10th layer Qi refining cultivator know it? Even a 12th layer Qi refining disciple from a cultivation sect might not be able to grasp it, right? Xiao Hua, a loose cultivator actually has this kind of divine ability. Unexpectedly, just as Shwe was thinking this, Xiao Hua took out several yellow talismans from his storage pouch again and said with a smile, I don't have many yellow talismans, but I have a lot of flying talismans. It's precisely for escaping. You. Shwe didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but there was a trace of disappointment in her heart. It seems like Xiao Hua should be able to fly. All right, fellow Daoist Shwe, the cultivators in front of us have already disappeared. The ones behind us are still wasting their time. We'll take our leave first. Let's see what dangers this Seeking Thunder Valley has. Xiao Hua waved his hand and used a flying talisman on himself. Shwe also calmed herself down and nodded. I will listen to fellow Daoist Xiao's instructions. As he spoke, he followed behind Xiao Hua. The scenery of Seeking Thunder Valley was beautiful. Countless fresh flowers and green grass covered the ground. Countless oddly shaped trees grew diagonally on both sides of the valley. Occasionally, there were even a few small streams flowing out from the caves of the valley. They flowed along the slopes of the valley. One could only hear the gurgling sound of the water, but one couldn't see the end of the stream. At this time, it was already dusk. Seeking Thunder Valley was located in an east-west direction. In the western horizon, countless clouds were like shredded cotton, covering the entire sky. The dim sunset was blocked by a thick layer of clouds. From time to time, a dark red light would seep through the gaps between the clouds, but before it could illuminate the valley, it was already diffused by the darkness of the night. It's a bit strange. Xiao Hua paid attention to the surrounding scenery, but apart from being beautiful, he didn't see any danger. He couldn't help but ask in a low voice, fellow Daoist Shwe, are you sure this is the trial grounds of the Imperial Thunder Sect's high-level disciples? Fellow Daoist Shwe? Xiao Hua asked a few questions. Seeing that no one answered, he couldn't help but turn his head and ask again. Ah! When Xiao Hua turned his head and saw that there was no one behind him, he couldn't help but get goosebumps. Just now, wasn't she still following behind me? How come she disappeared without a word? Xiao Hua took a deep breath, calmed himself down, and looked around. However, There was only the sound of the wind behind him, and only the scenery that he had just walked over. Where could he see half of Shue's figure? Fellow Daoist Shue? Fellow Daoist Shue? Xiao Hua raised his voice and shouted a few more times. Moreover, he turned around and flew back. The valley was still as quiet as before. There was no one in sight, nor was there, Ayo, not good. Xiao Hua suddenly realized that the scene he saw when he was flying back was exactly the same as the scene he saw when he was flying forward. Not good, it can't be an illusion formation, right? Xiao Hua immediately thought of what he encountered on Thousand Zhong Peak. Sure enough, when Xiao Hua turned around and flew forward again, the scenery around him was the same as the scenery he saw when he turned around. When Xiao Hua raised his head to look at the west, the sun had already set, and the hazy stars gradually began to appear. Ari, I'm afraid. Xiao Hua thought. When he turned his head to look at the other side of the valley, it was absolutely strange. The stars in the valley also had the same appearance, but they revealed a dim starlight. Chimph tilde Xiao Hua sneered. He stood up, urged his magic power, and used the flight technique. His entire body was like a meteor, flying towards a section of the valley at extreme speed. According to Xiao Hua's thoughts, when he was at the second level of qi refining, he could rely on his flying speed to break through Yulian Mountain's bewildering fog beast. This Seeking Thunder Valley's illusion formation should also be able to be broken through with the flight technique, right? Unfortunately, Xiao Hua flew extremely fast. When he saw that the surrounding scenery was somewhat blurry, and it seemed like it was about to be torn apart by Xiao Hua, the space around Xiao Hua suddenly moved. For some reason, the surrounding scenery became clear again, as if Xiao Hua simply didn't fly away. Good heavens, this Seeking Thunder Valley's illusion formation is really powerful. It's worthy of being a place where peak qi refining cultivators train. Seeing this, Xiao Hua stopped. He frowned and thought to himself, there's no need to say anything. Shue is probably the same as me. Oh, all the cultivators must have fallen into this illusion formation. But, how do I break this illusion formation? Xiao Hua's figure floated in midair. His hands crossed in front of his chest, and he frowned as he thought, illusion formation, illusion formation. Ayo, how could I forget? Don't I still have my perception? Xiao Hua suddenly thought, and immediately released his perception. Sure enough, in Xiao Hua's perception, although he couldn't see any restrictions, he could still feel the outline of Seeking Thunder Valley. Therefore, Xiao Hua slowed down his flying speed, and slowly advanced in the direction of Seeking Thunder Valley. However, when he flew a few feet in a straight line, he encountered another restriction. In his perception, every time he flew half a foot forward, his body would abruptly return to its original spot. It seemed like this was some kind of spatial restriction technique. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Hua landed on the ground and took a step forward. From what the naked eye could see, he took this step firmly. However, from what the naked eye could sense, this step only swayed in the air for a moment before landing on the ground again. I've found the location of the formation, but how do I break the restriction? Xiao Hua only practiced the art of making talismans and alchemy. This art of formations, he still didn't have the opportunity to come into contact with it. Xiao Hua stood on the ground, frowning. He released his perception, and used his hand to touch his nose as he walked back and forth. After walking for a while, Xiao Hua discovered that this space was only about 100 zhong wide. Moreover, this restriction also had the effect of isolating divine sense. Even if Xiao Hua's perception it was blocked and couldn't pass through. That's strange. If this is an illusion formation, then shouldn't Shue be at the same distance as me? But, why isn't there anything around me, but I don't know if there's anything behind me? Xiao Hua was somewhat puzzled. Besides, where are the thousands of people in front of me? How? Ha, Xiao Hua suddenly laughed, and walked back to the location of the restriction with large strides. He released his perception, and used his feet to continuously walk back there. 1 step, 2 steps, each step brought him back to its original position. Could it be that I'm wrong? Xiao Hua scratched his head, but just as he was hesitating, in his perception, he actually took a step forward. Ha, didn't I say so? This restriction definitely works sometimes, or else Xue Xue and I would definitely be together. Xiao Hua laughed loudly, and released his perception. Sure enough, within this 100 zhong, Xue Xue was like a headless fly, flying everywhere, and her face was abnormally panic. Xiao Hua flew up to Xue Xue's side, and said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Xue, ah? Fellow Daoist Xiao, where did you come from?" Xue Xue cried out in pleasant surprise, but when her gaze searched for the origin of Xiao Hua's voice, there was actually a blank space. What's going on? Xiao Hua withdrew his perception. Sure enough, where he looked, Xue Xue's figure also disappeared. Damn, this illusion formation is really powerful. It can actually meet but can't see. Xiao Hua cursed in his heart, and released his perception again. He thought for a moment, and said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Xue, don't panic, I will go over and pull you." Okay. Xue Xue responded, but there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. However, when she felt 2 fingers tugging at her sleeve, there was a trace of disappointment for no reason. "Fellow Daoist Xiao, can you see me?" I can vaguely see a bit." Xiao Hua said vaguely, "This is an illusion formation, follow I." "Okay." Xue Xue responded, and followed Xiao Hua's pull, slowly moving forward. Rumble right at this moment, a burst of fireball talismans exploded behind Xue Xue, shaking the surrounding valleys to the point of shaking. It was reckoned that Xiao Hua and the other cultivators behind him had also fallen into the illusion formation. "Fellow Daoist Xiao, quickly leave. This illusion formation can be forcefully broken with magic power, but if it can't be broken, its counterattack power will be even stronger. This kind of Seeking Thunder Valley is a place of trial for high-level disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. It's not something we can break by force, we can't let other people ruin our good fortune. Damn it, we just entered the valley. With such a powerful illusion formation, how can people survive?" Xiao Hua couldn't help but curse. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, Xue Xue's heart stirred, and she said in a low voice, "Fellow Daoist Xiao, in front, do you see other cultivators?" "Seems like there aren't any." Xiao Hua seemed to have thought of something as well. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian." -6. Chapter 1521. I'm afraid I was harmed by you. Xue Xue's expression was indescribable. Her pair of beautiful eyes stared at Xiao Hua as if she was blaming him, and also, acting coquettishly. But, could she see Xiao Hua? Xiao Hua didn't think so much, but his face was still embarrassed. He smiled apologetically and said, I was too cautious. I didn't expect that this thunder-seeking valley was used by Imperial Thunder Sect's peak aura refining disciples. Most of us cultivators are in the middle stage or early stage. How can we compare to Imperial Thunder Sect's late-stage aura refining disciples? If this thunder-seeking valley's restrictions were all opened, I'm afraid there wouldn't be many who could pass through, right? Therefore, some of the restrictions in this thunder-seeking valley are open, and some are closed. This illusion formation was probably closed when the cultivators passed through, Xue Xue added. At this time, she didn't have the slightest intention of blaming him. That's right. Xiao Hua nodded slightly. At this time, the two of them had already walked to the front of the restriction. Xiao Hua smiled and said, Fellow Daoist Xue, please wait a moment. After a while, when the restriction in the space stopped, Xiao Hua pulled Xue Xue's sleeve and walked forward again. Why did you stop for a while? The two of them walked silently for a while. Xue Xue looked at Xiao Hua and asked in a low voice. Oh, nothing. I just found that illusion formation. Xiao Hua said casually. But when he spoke, he suddenly realized that he could see Xue Xue's face. That pair of joyful and worried eyes were staring straight at him. Oh. Xiao Hua immediately withdrew his hand and shouted, Fellow Daoist Xue, you can see I? Seeing Xiao Hua's somewhat nervous appearance, Xue Xue laughed and said, I could see Fellow Daoist after we stopped for a while. It's just that Fellow Daoist was busy rushing, so I didn't mention it. Ha ha. Ha ha. Xiao Hua rubbed his hands and pointed, then we'll just keep going forward. Go forward. Xue Xue said curiously, that's obviously a stream, Fellow Daoist Xiao, Xiao Hua patted his forehead and said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Shui, just listen to I. If we don't move forward, I'm afraid we'll still be flying around like before. You're the one who's flying everywhere." Shui Shui seemed to have also heard the word fly in Xiao Hua's words and rebuked him, raising her hand and saying, "What?" Xiao Hua was a little stunned as he looked at Shui Shui's snow-white wrist. "Nonsense, you have to pull me. Otherwise, I know where to go." Shui Shui laughed. Xiao Hua's eyes flickered. His left hand hesitated by Shui Shui's wrist for a moment, but he still reached back and grabbed Shui Shui's Daoist robe. The two of them walked for a long time, stopping and walking like this, not saying anything else. Shui Shui only followed Xiao Hua. Even if it was a stream, even if it was a mountain wall, she didn't avoid it at all. She opened her eyes wide and only cared about walking. From the looks of it, she was extremely reassured by Xiao Hua. The night breeze gently blew, and the starlight became even more brilliant. The atmosphere between the two people was somewhat strange. It seemed to be a kind of tranquility, and also seemed to be a kind of tacit understanding. In short, Shui Shui didn't ask Xiao Hua why he could see through this illusion array, and also didn't ask how he passed through this seeking thunder valley. "We're here." Hearing Xiao Hua's words and feeling Xiao Hua's hand let go of her, Shui Shui felt a burst of disappointment in her heart for no reason, as if she really hoped that the illusion array of this seeking thunder valley was as long as possible. What's wrong with me?" Shui Shui's face was slightly red, and she couldn't help but ask herself in her heart. However, before her thoughts turned, Xiao Hua asked with concern, "Fellow Daoist Shui, what's wrong with you? Did I make a mistake? Could it be?" "Oh, no, nothing." Shui Shui hurriedly covered it up. She raised her eyes and looked at the somewhat spacious area in front of her. "There weren't any flowers or plants in the valley. I'm just very curious. This place is very different from what I saw just now. Why are there all bare stone walls? I don't know if we're still in the illusion array." Following Shui Shui's gaze, Xiao Hua said with a smile, "If fellow Daoist Shui sees bare stone walls, then you're right. This place has already left the illusion array." Shui Shui felt a burst of regret for no reason in her heart. Why didn't I say that the flowers and plants are still lush? Soon after, the two of them flew up one after the other. However, just after flying for several tens of feet and turning a few corners, Xiao Hua suddenly stopped. Shui Shui was somewhat absent-minded and almost bumped into Xiao Hua's back. The strong aura on Xiao Hua's body caused Shui Shui to feel a burst of impatience, and her eyes flickered incessantly. "Fellow Daoist Shui?" Xiao Hua asked again with concern. Was it, just now in the illusion array, Xiao Hua obviously discovered Shui Shui's abnormality? "No." Shui Shui's figure took a deep breath, and the slightly clear cold wind made Shui Shui slowly sober up. Xiao Hua was a bit worried and warned, "Fellow Daoist Shui, I don't have any heart-clearing yellow talismans here. If you have any in your storage bag, it's best to use one." "An illusion array? Maybe there's some hidden restriction within it." Seeing Xiao Hua so concerned, Shui Shui felt sweet in her heart and smiled. I'll do as you say." As he spoke, he slapped his hand and took out a rarely seen soul-cleansing talisman from his storage bag. He urged his magic power, and the soul-cleansing talisman turned into a sparkling stream of water that poured down on Shui Shui's head. With a shua sound, Shui Shui seemed to have suddenly woken up. Her mind was clear, and those beautiful thoughts in her heart just now all disappear. "I'm ashamed," Shui Shui secretly shouted in her heart. Needless to say, everything just now was caused by the illusion array. Was there even a need to say it? The illusion array of Seeking Thunder Valley was used to test Imperial Thunder Sect's 11th level Chi refinement disciples. How could it be just a mere maze? More importantly, it was the erosion of the mind. Just now, Shui Shui was running around randomly in the illusion array, and her mind was lost. She had long been confused by the illusion array, and an inner demon was born. In addition, she relied on Xiao Hua, so of course her feelings were secretly born. If it wasn't for Xiao Hua's timely reminder, this inner demon would have become even stronger, and in the end affect her cultivation. "Many thanks, fellow Daoist Xiao." The trace of confusion in Shui Shui's eyes disappeared, and with some lingering fear, she cupped her hands and smiled. If it wasn't for fellow Daoist Xiao's reminder, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Hehe, there's no other reason, we're just mutually supporting each other, that's all. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and then pointed ahead and said, I'm afraid that ahead is the true place to test the new disciples. Oh, is that so? Xue Xue's face turned cold, and looked in the direction Xiao Hua pointed. She saw that in front of the bend, there were scattered some rags, some worn-out talisman papers, and even a small storage pouch. Let's carefully go over and take a look. Xiao Hua extended his right hand's finger, and slightly pointed. Seeing Xiao Hua's finger move slightly, Xue Xue's heart also slightly jumped, and then she was greatly shocked. Could it be, the effect of the illusion array still hasn't been removed? However, the feeling of her heartbeat was so enjoyable that Xue Xue couldn't help but stare at Xiao Hua's thin and tall back. That back seemed lonely, but in the loneliness, there was a kind of indomitable feeling. Alas, the feelings and inner demons of this world, who can clearly say which is real and which is fake? I'm afraid that when the fake is real, the real is fake, and when the real is fake, the fake is real. Fellow Daoist Xue, look. Xiao Hua very carefully flew to the corner. Looking ahead, he saw that the valley, which was about 100 meters long, was perfectly straight. However, this perfectly straight valley was in a complete mess. Yes, at this time, Xue Xue also restrained her emotions, and flew to Xiao Hua's side. After looking, she nodded and said, this should be the Imperial Thunder Sect's test. This is an offensive formation. If you can resist it, then you can enter the next section, otherwise. Yes, since there aren't any corpses, presumably the Imperial Thunder Sect also left a way out. That number plate should have a protective function. What that senior said just now should be to guard against us. Yes, fellow Daoist Xiao, we have the number plates on our bodies. If we activate the protection of the number plates, we should be teleported out of this thunder-seeking valley, and thus lose the qualifications to be selected. Xue Xue's face was also solemn. Looking at the debris left in this valley, she knew that this offensive formation must be incomparably powerful. Xiao Hua clapped his hands, took out several yellow talismans, and placed them on his body one by one. Xue Xue also did the same. Ari, if only I had some kind of protective magic tool. Xiao Hua's heart was moved as he thought to himself. Unfortunately, there were many things in Xiao Hua's space, and there were also a few magic tools. For example, the Spirit Husbandry Sect's triangle, Yang Wei's ring, Ling Zhengyi's shadow moon, and Xiaonan's Cheng family's soul-absorbing bell. Unfortunately, these things all needed to be refined using the secret techniques of their respective sects. Xiao Hua didn't have the technique to refine them, so he couldn't refine them. The only magic tool he could refine was Ling Zhengyi's shadow moon, but Xiao Hua had some misgivings about it, so he naturally couldn't refine it. Therefore, Xiao Hua still lacked a suitable magic tool. What about the others? They were all things he took from low and middle level qi refinement cultivators, so it was impossible for there to be any magic tools. As for the storage bag he got from the talisman puppet, other than some yellow talismans and spirit stones from the Fu family, there was nothing else. Let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work, I can only fly a bit faster. Xiao Hua made up his mind, turned his head and said, fellow Daoist Xue, stay closer to me. If it really doesn't work, I will fly a bit faster and see if I can pull you and escape. Okay. Xue Xue nodded. She stretched out her hand, took out several yellow talismans, and flew to Xiao Hua's side. Let's go. Xiao Hua ordered, and the two of them flew inside at the same time. Wu tilde when Xiao Hua and Xue Xue just passed the corner, a gust of wind blew, and the sky above lightning-seeking valley was instantly filled with many dark cloud. Catcher immediately, several hair-thin lightning bolts struck down. Are you kidding me? It's actually heavenly lightning? Xiao Hua and Xue Xue were dumbstruck. This kind of lightning, which Qi refinement cultivator could dodge it. Fortunately, the lightning bolts didn't directly strike Xiao Hua and Xue Xue. Instead, they struck the stone walls on both sides. Zilla the heavenly lightning struck down, and countless tiny lightning bolts appeared on the stone walls. A purple brilliance gradually emerged from the stone walls, forming a net. Then, it flew out from the stone walls in all directions, covering Xiao Hua and Xue Xue. Damn it! Seeing this, Xiao Hua couldn't help but curse. The entire valley is covered with this kind of forbidden technique. No matter how fast I fly, it's impossible for me to fly out in an instant. Those thousands of people. Alas, aren't they suitable for this kind of forbidden technique? Thinking quickly, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and dozens of top-quality fireball talismans were taken out by him. He urged his magic power, and threw them towards the sky above his head. Shue Shue was the same. Several yellow talismans flew out, and a fire net flew into the sky. -6. Chapter 1522. Rumble. A series of loud noises rang out. The fireball talismans that Xiao Hua threw out were extremely powerful, blasting away the lightning bolts that were falling down from above, creating a large gap. When Shue Shue's fire net talisman flew into the air, the brilliance and power of the fire net talisman was far inferior to Xiao Hua's fireball talisman. Top-grade fireball talisman? Shue Shue was so shocked that she covered her mouth. She was very clear on how much spirit stones this thing was worth. She had never seen someone throw out so many without any heartache. Of course, you get what you pay for. Seeing that the lightning restriction was broken by Xiao Hua, Shue Shue was also delighted after her shock. Damn! Just as a smile appeared on Shue Shue's face, an extremely large amount of spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to gather at the spot where the lightning had already dissipated in the air, setting off gusts of wind. One could see with the naked eye that in the gap created by the fireball talisman, flashes of lightning gradually appeared once again. Another complete lightning net quickly gathered together, and without any change in its trajectory, it spread towards the entire lightning-seeking valley. Moreover, this time, the lightning net was much closer to Xiao Hua. Damn it, how did the cultivators in front pass through? Xiao Hua cursed in a low voice. With a wave of his hand, he immediately threw out a dozen fireball talismans. Rumble. A loud sound rang out, and another large gap was created. Go! Xiao Hua shouted and pulled his hand, grabbing Shue Shue's sleeve. The two of them quickly flew towards the gap in the air, and before the lightning net could recover, they flew to the top of the lightning net. Hurry up and fly over there. Xiao Hua pointed forward. Shue Shue understood and urged her magic power to fly forward at high speed. Before they could fly more than 30 meters, a few more lightning bolts struck the stone wall. Another wave of lightning net formed above Xiao Hua and Shue Shue's heads, and once again scattered down. Xiao Hua had no choice but to fly down a bit and throw out fireball talismans again. Fellow Daoist Xiao, quickly look below. Shue Shue was very alarmed, and she lowered her head and shouted. Are you kidding me? Xiao Hua slightly lowered his head, and immediately saw that the lightning net that fell on the ground just now was once again covering the ground, and it was not far from their feet. Without hesitation, Xiao Hua threw out a bunch of fireball talismans again. After dodging 2 lightning nets, Xiao Hua was just about to breathe a sigh of relief. Who would have thought that the third lightning net would fall after it struck the stone wall? It's not over. Xiao Hua was greatly shocked. If this continues, wouldn't this lightning net be endless? Ari, why didn't I think of flying up? Xiao Hua looked at the 2 gaps created by the explosion. He waved his hand and pulled Shue Shue's Daoist robe upward. How Shue Shue did not expect Shue Shue would suddenly. Xiao Hua's figure did not catch up. In a hurry, the Daoist robe in Xiao Hua's hands was about to slip. Xiao Hua's movements were also fast, and he grabbed Shue Shue's wrist. At this time, Shue Shue was also shocked, and she also reached out to grab Xiao Hua's wrist. In an instant, the two of them grabbed each other's wrist at the same time. Shue Shue and Xiao Hua were both shocked, and they wanted to let go at the same time. However, just as they let go, they felt that the other party wanted to let go. Their hands tightened again, and they grabbed each other's wrists again. Forget it. Xiao Hua did not have time to say anything. He let Shue Shue grab his wrist, and he also grabbed Shue Shue's wrist, and suddenly flew towards the top of Thunder-Seeking Valley. Xiao Hua's flying technique was extremely fast. In just a breath's time, he had already rushed out of the lightning net and reached the top of the valley. Hihi, if I had known this would happen, I would have. Xiao Hua's heart flashed with a trace of hope. Suddenly, a few strands of lightning as thick as hair flashed from the low clouds. These lightning bolts didn't strike the stone walls of the thunder-seeking valley, but directly fell towards Xiao Hua. Ouch! Xue Xue could not help but cry out in alarm, and she grabbed Xiao Hua's wrist even closer. Damn it! Xiao Hua immediately waved his hand, and a pile of fireball talismans appeared again, exploding a gap under their feet, and the two of them fell into the lightning net again. Those lightning bolts fell on the lightning net, and in an instant, the gap created by Xiao Hua's explosion was filled. What should we do? Xiao Hua stopped in midair, and looked at the distance of thunder-seeking valley, and then looked at Xue Xue. Xue Xue's face was red, and she quickly wanted to let go of his hand. However, Xiao Hua did not let go, and said in a low voice, "Fellow Daoist Xue, if you trust one, then close your eyes. Don't use any magic power, and I will bring you out of here." "Okay. I will listen to fellow Daoist Xiao's instructions." Xue Xue's heart felt warm, and her heart was calm. She closed her eyes, and the hand that had just let go grabbed Xiao Hua's wrist again. Rumble. There was a loud sound, and then, Xue Xue felt like she was a kite, flying up and down. The speed of flying up and down was extremely fast, and a burst of violent wind sounded in her ears. The wind was biting cold, and it blew Xue Xue painfully. She originally wanted to use her magic power to protect herself, but when she thought of Xiao Hua's warning, she did not dare to use the defensive yellow talisman. Fortunately, this time was not long. Without waiting for Xue Xue to count to 10 in her heart, Xiao Hua's figure stopped. However, after a while, Xiao Hua still did not let Xue Xue open her eyes. "Xiao Hua, can I open my eyes?" Xue Xue could not help but ask. "Oh, of course you can," Xiao Hua's voice sounded, and then, Xiao Hua's hand slowly loosened. Ouch, is he doing it on purpose? Xue Xue's heart suddenly panicked, and she forgot to open her eyes. "Fellow Daoist Xue, use the flying talisman, there is no problem here." Xiao Hua's tone did not have any joy. "Okay." Xue Xue activated her magic power, and at the same time opened her eyes. She did not know if it was intentional or not, but her hand did not let go of Xiao Hua's wrist. Ah! When Xue Xue opened her eyes and saw the scene in front of her, Xue Xue could not help but cry out in alarm. About 10 feet away from the two of them, there was a lightning net flashing with a faint purple brilliance, blocking the entire passage of thunder-seeking valley from top to bottom. There was simply no gap for them to fly through. "Fellow Daoist Xue, let go of your hand first." Xiao Hua's expression was somewhat gloomy, and he said in a low voice. Yes, Xue Xue's voice was like a mosquito's buzzing. She let go of his hand, but at the same time, she could not help but look back. Not far away, there was also an extremely large amount of rolling lightning net that had not completely disappeared, and its power was still not reduced, sealing off thunder-seeking valley. Alas, if it was not for Xiao Hua, this trial. I'm afraid it would be impossible for me to pass. Such a long distance, I don't know how did he fly so fast? It seems like he flew faster than Uncle. Xue Xue rejoiced, and also thought of those cultivators behind them just now. She did not know what method those people used to pass through here. "Fellow Daoist Xue, this lightning net is from top to bottom. If we directly fly over it, I'm afraid the lightning within the clouds will strike down again." Xiao Hua frowned and said, "And this lightning may not necessarily take our lives, but if we are hit, the thunder-controlling sect's number plate will definitely be activated, and our qualifications will also inevitably be lost. Fellow Daoist, do you have any methods?" "Hey, Xiao Hua, only now did you think to ask me?" Xue Xue's face revealed a smile, and she clapped her hand. An embroidered ball-like magic artifact appeared. On the round embroidered ball, there were extremely many openings, and all around the openings were fine runes that faintly flickered with magic power. "This is..." Xiao Hua's brows relaxed, and he asked in a low voice. "This is naturally my Misty Mountain's ancestral magic artifact, Jade Glyph," Xue Xue said proudly. "Ah, Jade Talisman?" Xiao Hua was greatly shocked, and he looked at the Jade Glyph very eagerly. "Of course not," Xue Xue said sweetly, "this is only a magic artifact, not a Jade Talisman. But, magic artifacts need divine sense. You're only at the 7th level of Qi refining, how can you control it?" Xiao Hua asked even though he already knew the answer. Hehe, Xiao Hua, are you really a loose cultivator? Haven't you heard that the ancestral magic artifacts of cultivation aristocratic families all have a kind of secret method to control them? Xue Xue didn't conceal anything, and she took out an old yellow talisman from her storage pouch, waving it as she said, "This yellow talisman was made by our ancestors. Only my Misty Mountains bloodline can use it." But Xiao Hua's eyes turned, and he hesitated to speak. "What's wrong?" Xue Xue stopped using magic power and asked curiously. "No, nothing. I just want to ask, if I don't have Misty Mountains bloodline, can this jade glyph not be controlled?" Xiao Hua waved his hand. He actually wanted to ask, Xue Xue has Misty Mountains bloodline, but she's a woman after all. Then, can her descendants also be controlled? This kind of question naturally wasn't good to ask directly, so he changed the topic. This yellow talisman was prepared for us chi refining cultivators. If you have my Misty Mountains sacrificial refining technique, you can naturally control it. Xue Xue didn't suspect anything, and she used her magic power to place the yellow talisman on her body. Soon after, she cast an obscure spell, and from the center of the jade glyph, a white mist gradually diffused out. Looking at the increasing amount of mist, Xue Xue continued to say, "Or, you can use a common sacrificial refining spell to refine these magic artifacts. Although those spells can't completely release the magic artifact's power, it's still much better than not being able to use them." "Heh. Then fellow Daoist Xue, do you have such a common sacrificial refining spell?" Xiao Hua was delighted, and he quickly asked. Xue Xue smiled bitterly. "My Misty Mountain is a cultivation aristocratic family, how could we have such a spell? If fellow Daoist enters the Imperial Thunder sect, you can see if they have such a spell." "Oh, so it's like that." Xiao Hua nodded. Not long after, enough white mist flew out from the jade glyph, and Xue Xue once again used her magic power to hold the jade glyph in her hand. The jade glyph flashed with a few faint rays of light, and the white mist scattered in the air and surrounded Xiao Hua and Xue Xue, just like a large ball of white cotton. "Will this work?" Xiao Hua was somewhat doubtful. Fellow Daoist Xiao, don't worry. Since there were cultivators who passed before, they must have also used their ancestral magic artifacts. I don't believe that a 10th layer chi refining cultivator like you can't do anything, so they can pass without using magic artifact. Xue Xue was full of confidence. -6. Chapter 1523. All right. Seeing the confidence on Xue Xue's face, Xiao Hua could only nod. Of course, Xiao Hua, let's use some yellow talismans like the Vajra talisman. Xue Xue clapped her hands and took out some defensive yellow talismans for Xiao Hua. This. If the white mist can't block the lightning net, what's the use of the Vajra talisman? Xiao Hua curled his lips in his heart, but he still took the yellow talisman and used his magic power to place it on his body. Xiao Hua, be careful and follow closely. Don't leave the white mist. Xue Xue warned again, and then used her magic power to activate the jade engraving to control the white mist. The two of them flew into the lightning net at the same time. Xiao Hua didn't dare to release his perception completely, but he still wanted to see the effects of the jade engraving, so he only released a little of his perception and paid attention to the changes in the white mist outside the jade engraving. As expected, the jade engraving was effective. When Xiao Hua and Xue Xue flew in front of the lightning net, before they entered, a part of the white mist had already merged into the lightning net. Zilla. After the lightning struck the white mist flashed with a faint purple brilliance and blocked the lightning outside. Great. Xiao Hua almost clapped his hands and thought, if I can refine a magic artifact, that spirit husbandry sex triangle can also release a ring. I reckon it can also pass through this lightning net. Xue Xue saw that the white mist was effective and said with a smile, Xiao Hua, be careful. We're going in now. Okay, I know. Xiao Hua said with a smile. As they spoke, Xue Xue controlled the white mist and the two of them entered the lightning net. Once the white mist entered the lightning net, it was like a drop of water falling into a pot of boiling oil. Around the white mist, sizzling sounds could be heard, and at the edge of the white mist, purple brilliance kept flickering. Of course, all the lightning was blocked outside the white mist, and Xiao Hua and Xue Xue were unharmed. Hihi, how is it? Xue Xue turned her face and said to Xiao Hua as if showing off her favorite toy. Is there anything else? It's great, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Xue Xue was excited and said with a smile, Uncle wanted me to take it, but I wasn't willing. Now that I think about it, it's a loss. Xiao Hua smiled without saying anything. Then, the two of them flew slowly as if they were taking a stroll. However, after the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xue Xue's expression turned ugly. What's wrong? Xiao Hua was very sensitive. Xiao Hua, I was too arrogant. Xue Xue's face gradually turned pale. I didn't expect this lightning net to be so long. My magic power. I'm afraid I won't be able to last much longer. Xiao Hua was shocked and asked anxiously, how long can it last? At this moment, Xue Xue tightly clenched her teeth and didn't speak anymore. Needless to say, she was trying her best to activate her Fa Li. Can you use my mana? Xiao Hua was very anxious. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Xue Xue's wrist. His magic power rushed over like a flood. It would have been fine if Xiao Hua's magic power didn't enter, but as soon as his magic power entered, it immediately disturbed Xue Xue's magic power. Xue Xue's true qi in her meridians was already exhausted. No matter how she mobilized Xiao Hua's magic power, if the two of them knew some kind of joint attack technique, then Xiao Hua would have been able to control the jade carving at the very beginning. Now that he channeled his magic power, not to mention that the two of them didn't know any joint attack technique, they couldn't fuse two different kinds of magic power together. Even if the two of them could fuse their magic power, at this moment, Xue Xue simply couldn't mobilize Xiao Hua's magic power. That magic power in Xue Xue's body could only damage Xue Xue's cultivation. With a pu sound, Xue Xue couldn't help but open her mouth and spit out a mouthful of blood. Immediately, the jade carving flashed wildly and the white mist was sucked into the jade carving like a swarm of bees. With a zlolo sound, the iron cloak talismans, diamond talismans, soft water talismans, and other talismans on Xiao Hua and Xue Xue's bodies were all destroyed by the lightning net. The yellow talismans used by qi refining cultivators were simply yellow paper under this lightning. They simply didn't have any decent resistance. With only a faint flash of brilliance, they were destroyed. Damn it! Xiao Hua was greatly alarmed. Almost without thinking, he waved his hand, wanting to take out some yellow talismans from the space. But just as he took out a few fire net talismans, he suddenly thought of the bead in the space. At this moment, the bead was still flickering with lightning. It attracted a lot of clouds in the space, and there were also lightning echoing in the cloud. Many areas in the space were covered with lightning. This is it. Thinking back to the day when he took this bead out of the space, Xiao Hua was delighted. Without hesitation, he took out the bead. Sure enough, as Xiao Hua expected, as soon as the bead was taken out of the space, the originally dense dark clouds in the sky above Thunder-Seeking Valley became even more turbulent. An extremely large amount of lightning was born in an instant. Around Xiao Hua and Xue Xue, the lightning that was originally going to hit them suddenly changed directions. Like swallows returning to their nest, they all hit the bead in Xiao Hua's hand. Not only that, but the lightning net of unknown length near Xiao Hua was also attracted by the bead. In the blink of an eye, it was completely sucked in, revealing an empty valley. Xiao Hua was pleasantly surprised. But looking at the lightning that was brewing above his head, the power of the lightning seemed to be much greater than the lightning net from before. Xiao Hua patted his hand and put the bead back into his storage pouch. The bead disappeared, and the lightning in the clouds should have disappeared as well. However, at this moment, on the mountain walls around Thunder-Seeking Valley, there was a flash of brilliance. Countless talisman characters gradually appeared, and immediately attracted the lightning in the cloud. Let's go. Xiao Hua naturally understood that this was the sign of the lightning net appearing again. With a pull of his hand, he grabbed Xue Xue's wrist and flew forward. Zlolo Xiao Hua and Xue Xue had just turned the corner of Seeking Thunder Valley when a series of noises came from behind them. Xiao Hua snuck a glance and saw that the lightning net had formed again just a few feet away from him. Damn it! Xiao Hua spat and said in a low voice, "Isn't this thunder-controlling sect's trial too much?" "Xiao Hua, you can't say that." Shue said in a weak voice, "The thunder-controlling sect's disciples are all handsome in the cultivation world. If they don't do this in their own trial, they will lose face for the thunder-controlling sect when they leave the sect. Life is a small matter, but reputation is a big matter." Looking at Shue's deathly pale face, Xiao Hua sighed in his heart and let go of his hand. He patted his hand and took out a parasol dragon pill that he refined and handed it over. He said with a smile, "Shue, I don't have any good medicinal pills here. This is a parasol dragon pill. Take one." Shue was very clear on what a parasol dragon pill was. It definitely wouldn't be effective for her Meridian's injuries, but on the other hand, this parasol dragon pill was given by Xiao Hua. A trace of sweetness emerged in Shue's heart. How could she refuse? Taking the parasol dragon pill, Shue glanced ahead and pointed with her finger. "Xiao Hua, let's go forward a bit more. It's better to be a bit further away from this forbidden spell." "I'll listen to you." Xiao Hua nodded. However, after they walked a few dozen feet and turned a corner, they couldn't help but be dumbstruck. "What do you think?" As it turned out, in front of this corner was a large open space. 1,000 or so cultivators who seemed to be in a difficult situation were all sitting cross-legged. Every one of them had their eyes closed and were adjusting their breathing. Ha ha ha. Seeing this, Xiao Hua almost laughed until he fainted. He secretly said, "I knew it." It was difficult for Shue and I to pass through these forbidden spells, but those thousands of cultivators had it easy for no reason. As it turns out, they were all hiding here to recuperate. From the looks of it, I'm afraid more than half of them have died. Seeing the strange expression on Xiao Hua's face, Shue seemed to understand what Xiao Hua was thinking. Looking at everyone's gaze sweeping over, Shue lightly touched Xiao Hua's arm with her elbow, indicating that Xiao Hua should restrain himself a bit. Let's go over there to adjust our breathing." Xiao Hua naturally understood. He pointed at the open space beside the stone wall and the two of them slowly walked over. When everyone saw that the two of them were similarly injured, their gazes also moved away and they minded their own business to recover. Shue looked at Xiao Hua pretending to adjust his breathing and secretly laughed in her heart. She put the parasol dragon pill into her mouth and took out her own medicinal pill, preparing to continue after taking the parasol dragon pill. However, when the medicinal liquid of the parasol dragon pill merged into her meridians and began to slowly repair the damaged meridians just now, Shue was dumbfounded. She couldn't help but exclaim in her heart, "A supreme grade spirit pill? This parasol dragon pill, when did it have the effect of repairing meridians? This sweetheart." When the medicinal power began to stabilize and repair her meridians, Shue couldn't help but open her eyes a bit. Looking at the solemn Xiao Hua beside her, a trace of sweetness appeared in her heart. "He definitely didn't want me to know that this was a supreme grade spirit pill and was afraid that I would refuse, so he deliberately deceived me. Would I refuse? How could Xiao Hua know what Shue was thinking? Feeling that someone was watching him, he also opened his eyes. When Shue saw Xiao Hua open his eyes, she immediately closed her eyes again, leaving a trace of red on her face. That trace of red on Shue's snow-white face was so obvious. Hey! Could it be, there's a problem? Xiao Hua saw that Shue's complexion wasn't good and was slightly shocked. However, looking at Shue, other than her face being a bit red, everything else was normal. It didn't seem like there was a problem. He didn't know that in just a day's time, Shue's impression of him had completely changed. In fact, when he thought about it, two strangers who knew each other, and fell in love, who could clearly distinguish which day was the key to the change. At this moment, the group of cultivators that had arrived earlier began to make some noise. Xiao Hua wasn't injured, so he stood up and looked over. He saw that among these cultivators, there were about 10 high-level cultivators at the 11th level of Qi refining gradually gathering together. Around these cultivators, there were several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of Qi refining who also surrounded them, as if they were discussing something. The other cultivators all stood up and watched from the side. After a long while, they seemed to have come to a conclusion. The 10 or so cultivators at the 11th level of Qi refining dispersed and gave orders to the several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of Qi refining. The several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of Qi refining then walked towards the other cultivators. Among them, a cultivator who was about 30 years old saw Xiao Hua and walked over. -6. Chapter 1524. Fellow Daoist, please. That cultivator walked in front of Xiao Hua, glanced at Shui, cupped his hands in greeting, and said very elegantly, I am Ma Miaoming of Luanxi's Ma clan. May I know which cultivation clan fellow Daoist comes from? Xiao Hua smiled and returned the greeting. Fellow Daoist Ma, I, Xiao Hua, am a loose cultivator. Chem? Loose cultivator? Ma Miaoming's brows inadvertently wrinkled. Although he tried his best to conceal it, a trace of disdain still flashed through his eyes. But that disdain was immediately covered up by elegance, and he said with a meaningful smile, so it's fellow Daoist Xiao. I came this time because I have something to discuss with fellow Daoist Xiao. Ma Miaoming had a smile on his face, and his actions were also refined and courteous, but his tone immediately had an additional layer of condescending feeling. How could Xiao Hua not hear it? Looking at the clamor in front of him, and then looking at Shui at the side, he nodded and said, Fellow Daoist Ma, please speak. I am all ears. Oh, it's nothing. Presumably fellow Daoist Xiao already knows that when we first entered Seeking Thunder Valley, there were more than a few thousand people, but after just passing through 2 formations, nearly half of the fellow Daoists died inside, and only a little over 1,000 remained. If we still blindly charge forward like this without any organization, I'm afraid we'll all die in another formation, and there won't be too many fellow Daoists entering the Imperial Thundersec. Ma Miaoming pointed again and said, Fellow Daoist Xiao already saw just now that the few fellow Daoists with the highest cultivation bases in my cultivation clan are merciful and thinking about the future of the fellow Daoists. They want to organize all the fellow Daoists and advance and retreat together under their orders. This way, more fellow Daoists can pass through Seeking Thunder Valley. Chem. That's a good idea. Xiao Hua pinched his chin and nodded. This is a good thing that benefits others and oneself. I naturally have reasons to agree. Ma Miaoming looked at Xiao Hua with a smile that wasn't a smile, as if looking at a country bumpkin. After Xiao Hua finished speaking, he said, however, these fellow Daoists still have some request. Request? A trace of vigilance appeared in Xiao Hua's heart. He said curiously, Fellow Daoist Ma, please speak. Haha, it's not a big deal. These fellow Daoists are all at the 11th layer of Qi refining. If they can't pass through Thunder-Seeking Valley, then I'm sure we can't either. Since they want us to pass together, they'll have to put in a lot more effort than if they were to pass alone. That's why they want to. Ma Miaoming thought for a moment before continuing, if any of you pass through Thunder-Seeking Valley under their command, then when you enter the Imperial Thundersect in the future, you'll need to listen to them. Xiao Hua slightly frowned. He was already displeased in his heart. If it was some yellow talisman, spirit stones, and the like, then it would be fine to give it to them in a short period of time. However, they were actually scheming for the future matters of the Imperial Thundersect. This was a bit too much. Listening to everything he said, I'm afraid I won't have the freedom to speak for myself in the future. You haven't even entered the Imperial Thundersect, and you're already forming your own faction. This disciple of a cultivation family is indeed extraordinary. Xiao Hua thought to himself. Just as he was about to refuse, Ma Miaoming said without any sense of propriety, of course, this is only the first condition. There's a second condition? Xiao Hua was greatly surprised. He wanted to get to the bottom of it. What's that? These few fellow Daoists only have the strength to lead the cultivators who are not injured. As long as there are some injuries, they don't want them at all. Ma Miaoming glanced at Shui. Shui opened her eyes and coldly swept a glance at Ma Miaoming. She sneered and said, Fellow Daoists, come up with a plan. Hee. Ma Miaoming was also quite shameless. His expression didn't change in the slightest. He cupped his hands and said, Seeking Thunder Valley is a dangerous place of the Imperial Thundersect. This time, we have just taken a few steps. The road ahead is still very long. Fellow Daoist Xiao is a loose cultivator. Without a good friend, I'm afraid it won't be easy to pass through this seeking Thunder Valley. Besides, even if fellow Daoist Xiao enters the Imperial Thunder Sect, a lone loose cultivator, I'm afraid there won't be any future prospects. This is a good opportunity. If it was me, I would have laughed until my teeth fell out. Fellow Daoist Xiao had better think carefully. Finished speaking, Ma Miaoming turned around and went to persuade the other cultivators. A disciple of a cultivator family, your methods are quite high. Xiao Hua looked at Ma Miaoming's back and sneered. Ari, who asked the world of cultivators to be so cruel? There are only so many cultivation methods, only so many spirit stones, and only so many opportunities to enter the Imperial Thunder Sect. Who wouldn't want to fight for it? Xue Xue sighed and closed her eyes to adjust her breathing. She was very confident in Xiao Hua and knew that he wouldn't abandon her. The requirements of these cultivator family disciples were indeed very harsh. However, seeing that they could pass the test and enter the Imperial Thunder Sect, this kind of temptation wasn't something that people like Xiao Hua could refuse. In just the time it took for an incense stick to burn, most of the cultivators followed them, and that Ma Miaoming didn't come to find Xiao Hua again. However, Xiao Hua saw clearly that after Ma Miaoming went back, he whispered something in the ear of an 11th level Qi refining cultivator, and that cultivator also looked at Xiao Hua. Even when he saw Xiao Hua's indifferent gaze, his eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. After a long while, this cultured and refined cultivator, who was about 30 years old, flew into the air and said with a smile, "Well, I am indebted to everyone's favor. If you follow us, then we will certainly do our best to ensure that everyone passes, not only for the second test, but also for the third test that is about to come. I promise that I will give everyone a satisfactory answer. I also believe that everyone here doesn't need to make any blood oath or heart oath. In the future, you only need to remember today's promise." Who is this? Xiao Hua looked at this mid-stage 11th level Qi refining cultivator and asked in a low voice. Xue Xue glanced at him and said, "Chong Lotus Village's Jiang Ming Xiao. He can be considered as the leader of the younger generation in our country of Xi. Since childhood, he has been intelligent and a cultivation genius. He has always wanted to enter the 3 major cultivation sects, but the opportunities were always bad and he didn't succeed." Surnamed Jiang. Xiao Hua looked at Jiang Ming Xiao and felt an inexplicable dislike in his heart. Yes, Jiang as in Jiang Shui. Xue Xue didn't understand and explained. Good, good. Xiao Hua shouted twice and then ignored him. At this time, there were many cultivators gathered around Jiang Ming Xiao. There were 10th level Qi refining cultivators and 9th level Qi refining cultivators. They were all fighting to speak to Jiang Ming Xiao. It seemed like they were prepared to rely on Jiang Ming Xiao. It was very obvious that there were about 15 11th level Qi refining cultivators and about 8 to 900 uninjured cultivators. They were basically evenly divided into 15 small factions. "Fellow Taoists, are you all ready?" Jiang Ming Xiao said in a clear voice. "Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, we have been ready for a long time. Let's go." The crowd around Jiang Ming Xiao shouted. "Good, it's still not far from daybreak. We should go a step earlier." As Jiang Ming Xiao spoke, he cupped his hands towards the dozen or so 11th level Qi refining cultivators and said, "I will go first." After he finished speaking, his figure flew towards the valley entrance on the other side of the open space. The cultivators around him also flew. "Fellow Daoist Xue, how are your injuries?" Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked for a moment, then turned his head and asked. "It's about time. If fellow Daoist Xiao is in a hurry, we can set off now." Xue Xue stopped regulating her breath and prepared to stand up. "No hurry." Just as Xiao Hua uttered these 2 words, a huge thunderbolt suddenly appeared in the already slightly bright sky. That thunderbolt faintly emitted electric sparks and fire arcs in the night, and a kind of oppressive aura silently pressed down in the pitch-black darkness. This is. Not to mention Xiao Hua, everyone raised their heads in surprise. They didn't understand what this thunderbolt was doing at this time. Jiang Ming Xiao and the group of cultivators also stopped at this time. Their figures floated in the air and waited quietly. Zilla, there was another burst of thunder and lightning. A huge purple brilliance shot out from the thunderbolt and shot towards the valley entrance in front of Jiang Ming Xiao. Swoosh! When that brilliance landed at the valley entrance, a layer of faint purple brilliance emerged from the valley entrance and poured into the valley like mercury. What is the meaning of this? At this time, Xiao Hua and Xue Xue also flew up at this time. From afar, they looked at the brilliant and colorful stone wall and the valley entrance with confusion in their eyes. Just as the cultivators on the thunderboat were waiting for the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple to speak, the thunderboat flew towards Kongju for another 100 feet and quietly stopped. It was as if it was watching a play. Haha. Fellow Taoists, this is a test given to us by the Imperial Thunder Sect's masters. They must be on the thunderboat. Wait and see our performance. If any fellow Daoist's performance is outstanding, they might be directly accepted as a disciple by these masters. Jiang Ming Xiao said in a clear voice, "Let us raise our spirits and show our true ability to the Imperial Thunder Sect's masters." As he spoke, he took the lead and flew towards the entrance of the valley. There seemed to be a barrier at the entrance of the valley. When Jiang Ming Xiao's figure crashed into it, it was like throwing a stone into a calm lake. As his figure sank into the valley, the ripples spread out in all directions. Good tilde the cultivators behind Jiang Ming Xiao also came to their senses. For a moment, they were all excited. Almost all of them rolled up their sleeves and rushed into the valley. When Jiang Ming Xiao and the others rushed into the valley, the brilliance at the entrance of the valley returned to normal. Immediately after, the other 14 11th layer Qi refining cultivators led the others into the valley. In the open space, only Xiao Hua, Xue Xue, and over 100 injured cultivators who had yet to recover were left. Xiao Hua. Why don't I stay here? Your cultivation is profound. If I don't drag you down, you can definitely pass the selection later. Xue Xue's eyes turned a few times as she spoke faintly. However, her eyes were fixed on Xiao Hua, wanting to see what he would say. Ian, that's fine too. Xiao Hua looked ahead and said indifferently, "The injuries in your meridians haven't healed yet. If you force your way in, I'm afraid you'll be injured. If you fail to become a disciple and your meridians are damaged, the gains won't make up for the losses. It's better to stay here and rest." You. Xue Xue didn't expect Xiao Hua to say this. She bit her lips with her teeth and stomped on the ground a few times. She said, I don't believe that with my 7th level Qi refining cultivation, I can't even pass the second test." After he finished speaking, he activated his magic power and flew toward the entrance of the valley. -6. Chapter 1525. When did I say anything else? Xiao Hua, who was behind Xue Xue, smiled and said while rubbing his nose, "I only said that if your injuries haven't healed yet, you should rest for a while. Since you've already healed, you can naturally go forward together." Xue Xue coldly snorted and continued to fly forward without stopping. This person. As Xiao Hua spoke, he urged his magic power to follow closely behind Xue Xue and entered the valley. Just after Xiao Hua entered, a slightly immature voice came from the thunderboat, "Fellow Taoists, this is the last test of our sect's disciple selection. All fellow Taoists must enter. If you don't enter within 15 minutes, you'll automatically give up the selection and be transported to the Thunderclap Peak." Ah! The remaining 100 cultivators were shocked when they heard this and immediately got up from the ground. They didn't dare to delay any longer and entered the valley one after another. After all the cultivators had entered, another ray of light similar to the one before shot out from the thunderboat. When that ray of light shone into the valley that everyone had entered, the entire valley began to shake. Soon after, there was a rumbling sound as if the mountains were shaking and the earth was shaking. Then, the thunderboat suddenly slid and disappeared into the darkness of the night. As for Xiao Hua, he followed behind Xue Xue and entered the valley. However, the moment he entered, several different sceneries swayed before his eyes. Xiao Hua only felt a blur before his eyes, and then he was standing on top of a mountain. Beside him were only lofty mountains and precipitous ridges. Where was Xue Xue's trace? Ah! Illusion array? Xiao Hua was shocked. He really didn't expect that after passing through the illusion array, there would actually be another illusion array in this thunder-seeking valley. What made Xiao Hua even more uneasy was that when he released his perception and wanted to find out the truth behind the illusion like before, he shockingly discovered that what he saw with his perception was actually exactly the same as what he saw with his eyes. This. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and knew that the ray of light shot out from the thunderbolt just now was precisely to stimulate this illusion array. Moreover, this illusion array was the real illusion array of thunder-seeking valley. It was definitely not something that a 10th level qi refining cultivator like him could see through. Shwe shwe. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and shouted. Waves of echoes echoed from the valley below the mountain, but no one responded. I'm afraid this illusion array is divided into many parts. Shwe shwe and I didn't come in together, so we must have been assigned to different areas. Even if we came in together, I'm afraid we would be separated. Xiao Hua comprehended something, then he urged his transcendence energy and used the flight technique, flying high into the air. He raised his eyes to look at the vast expanse of lush greenery beneath his feet and said to himself, how do I break this illusion formation? Just as he was thinking, the entire world began to shake violently. Xiao Hua's standing figure almost lost its balance. Before Xiao Hua could fly up from the cliff, the mountain range under his feet began to rise with a rumbling sound. Looking around, there were also towering mountain ranges emerging from the ground with a rumbling sound. Around the mountain ranges, the previously lush forests had sunk into the ground as the mountain ranges rose. Streams of spring water gushed out, forming lakes. There were also some that were directly crushed into mud by the mountain peaks and disappeared. Xiao Hua was stunned. Although he knew that this was an illusory array, he still couldn't help but be shocked by everything that was happening before his eyes. I also don't know, what realm must I cultivate to be able to have this kind of divine ability that can move mountains and overturn seas? While Xiao Hua's eyes were burning with envy, he suddenly thought of the black dots, light, and the evolution of earth, fire, wind, and lightning that he saw while he was unconscious. His heart unconsciously rippled. This divine ability that can move mountains and overturn seas is already so terrifying, then the evolution of earth, fire, wind, and lightning is probably a divine ability that can create the universe. Then, just how majestic is it? Xiao Hua's chest couldn't help but rise with a kind of heroic spirit. He opened his mouth and let out a long roar. The rumbling sound of the trembling actually couldn't suppress this long roar. Ha 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 tilde this young master wants to see when this young master can reach the level of creation and move mountains and overturn seas. Just as Xiao Hua's voice fell, there was a sharp sound. From below Xiao Hua's body, the mountain range that had just risen abruptly split into two halves. Scorching hot magma gushed out from the mountain range and rushed straight towards Xiao Hua's body. Come on! Xiao Hua let out a loud shout as he circulated his magic power. His figure flickered as he used the fire escape technique. His feet landed on the magma, and his entire body moved along with the magma. At first glance, it looked as if he was stepping on fire. Fellow Taoist. Just as Xiao Hua stood on top of the magma and very carefully walked forward, a voice sounded. Following this voice, the trembling of the entire world suddenly stopped. The magma under Xiao Hua's feet also quickly cooled down and turned into crimson rocks. This is the illusory formation that my Imperial Thunder Sect's 12th layer Qi refinement disciples used to test their cultivation. It is also the third trial that all fellow Taoists must pass. The voice was like the sound of nature, resounding throughout the entire world. Currently, the 1,218 fellow Taoists who are participating in the selection are scattered within this illusory formation. There are absolutely no other cultivators within 10 li of each fellow Taoist. Because this time, my sect wants to recruit 100 disciples, 1,118 fellow Taoists will be eliminated. From now on, no matter what method is used, as long as a fellow Taoist number plate is snatched away by someone else, that fellow Taoist will be eliminated. And the more number plates a fellow Taoist accumulates, the higher his ranking will be. At dawn, my sect will open the illusory formation and rank the fellow Taoists according to the number of number plates obtained. The first 100 fellow Taoists will become disciples of my imperial thunder sec. After the voice finished speaking, the entire world became silent, without the slightest trace of movement. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be careless. He promptly released his perception. Sure enough, he didn't see any traces of cultivators in his surroundings. This rule is actually quite interesting. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at the mountain peak that had just been erected in the distance. He thought, this young master thought that there would be some kind of arena at the end to compete for the top 100. Who would have thought that the final disciples would be selected within this illusory formation? Moreover, according to the ranking of the number plates obtained, 1,118 fellow Taoists will be eliminated. If one wants to enter the top 100, one must obtain at least 12 number plates. Then, 12 fellow Taoists will be eliminated. It seems that there were quite a few middle-stage qi condensation cultivators in the open space just now. This young master gathering 12 number plates should be quite easy, right? Xiao Hua had a smile on his face, and his figure flew up. He glanced around and then casually flew towards a direction. However, at this time, a splendid firework flew into the air not too close to Xiao Hua's left. It didn't disperse for a long time, and soon after, another dozen or so similar things also flew up in succession, far and near. Hey, what's this for? Xiao Hua was rather puzzled and inwardly said, others can't hide in a hurry, but these people. Oh, I understand. Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization. These are those dozen or so 11th level qi condensation cultivators. They're calling out to the fellow Taoists who agreed to meet up with us just now, right? But the number plates are limited. Do those cultivators dare to meet up? Xiao Hua was puzzled again and immediately shook his head. Why do I care so much? This young master is going to gather 12 number plates first. With this thought, Xiao Hua increased his speed. Sure enough, just as he flew for a short moment, a 7th level qi condensation cultivator barged into Xiao Hua's perception. This cultivator wore a crimson Daoist robe, truly eye-catching. The red-robed cultivator seemed to be fleeing, turning his head to look back from time to time. By the time he discovered Xiao Hua, he was already in front of Xiao Hua. When the red-robed cultivator saw Xiao Hua's 10th level qi condensation cultivation, he almost cried out in alarm and hurriedly changed direction. Unfortunately, how could he fly faster than Xiao Hua? Just as he changed direction, Xiao Hua moved in front of him and laughed. Fellow Daoist, a crisp bang rang out. The red-robed cultivator simply didn't wait for Xiao Hua to finish speaking. The sword talisman in his hand transformed into a foot-long flying sword and directly pierced towards Xiao Hua's chest. Xiao Hua's brows slightly furrowed. Seeing the flying sword fly towards his chest with incomparable speed, he didn't have the slightest thought of dodging. He simply raised his right hand and slapped towards the flying sword. Ha! The red-robed cultivator was stunned. In his opinion, even if Xiao Hua's cultivation was at the 10th level of qi condensation, he should have taken out a high-level yellow talisman to deal with this flying sword talisman. How could he possibly receive the flying sword talisman with his bare hands? 10th level of qi condensation. Sure enough, it's a high-level cultivation. On the other side, Xiao Hua's expression was indifferent. He was still muttering in his heart, only after cultivating to a certain level would I know what kind of disdain he had when he faced me, a 4th-layer aura refining loose cultivator. Back then, when the Fu clan's talisman puppet faced me, I'm afraid it was also this easy. The gap between realms is really huge. Xiao Hua sighed with emotion as he urged his magic power and used the thunder palm in his hand. A half-foot-long lightning bolt flashed out of thin air and struck the flying sword in midair. With a cracking sound, the flying sword was immediately shattered by the thunder palm as if it was made of colored glass. Immediately, it turned into several pieces of paper and flew into the air. This high-level flying sword talisman, which in Xiao Hua's eyes before, seemed to be very powerful. Now, with a casual wave of Xiao Hua's hand, it vanished into thin air. The red-robed cultivator was even more terrified. He slapped his hand and took out another stack of fireball talismans, wanting to throw them out. Fellow Daoist, I only want your number plate, I don't want to take your life. If you continue to resist like this, don't blame I for being ruthless. Xiao Hua's cold voice sounded in the cultivator's ear. Hearing this, the red-robed cultivator's face revealed a trace of relief. He softly said, "Is fellow Daoist's words true? Believe it or not, I don't feel like explaining to you." Xiao Hua stood in midair and turned his head to look at where the cultivator came from. He said, "I have limited time, I will only count to 6. If fellow Daoist doesn't leave the number plate on the ground and leave, then I will. Yes, yes." Seeing Xiao Hua's anger, the red-robed cultivator didn't dare to be negligent. He slapped his hand and took out a number plate from his storage bag. He placed it on the ground and said, "I will leave the number plate here. I hope fellow Daoist will keep his word. Go." Xiao Hua indifferently looked at the number plate on the ground and waved his hand. But just as Xiao Hua was about to wave his hand, a hand suddenly reached out from the ground and grabbed the number plate in his hand. -6. Chapter 1526. Fellow Daoist Tilda. When the red-robed cultivator saw that the command tablet on the ground had been snatched away, he immediately looked nervously at Xiao Hua. But Xiao Hua wasn't the slightest bit nervous. Seeing that hand and the command tablet disappear into the ground, he laughed and said, "Take care of yourself and go." Then, the red-robed cultivator cupped his hands and said, At this moment, a strange thing happened. The red-robed cultivator's figure faintly flickered, like a candle swaying in the wind. After swaying twice, the red-robed cultivator disappeared from where he stood. What's going on? Xiao Hua was somewhat dazed, but when his perception tracked down the cultivator who had just taken the command tablet, he somewhat understood. The Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple said he wanted to eliminate 11-18 cultivators. I'm afraid this is the method of elimination. Just now, when the command tablet was about 1 zhong away from the red-robed cultivator, the red-robed cultivator immediately disappeared. He should have been transported out of this illusion formation. In other words, he was eliminated. The command tablet can't be more than 1 zhong away from the body. Otherwise, it will be regarded as having been snatched away and automatically transported out of the illusion formation. Why didn't the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple mention this kind of thing? Xiao Hua was bewildered, but he immediately formed hand seals and his body drilled into the ground. He used the earth escape technique and chased in the direction the other cultivator escaped in. The other cultivator was a person with a pointy mouth and monkey-like cheeks. He was precisely chasing after the red-robed cultivator from just now. Xiao Hua had long since discovered that. When the cultivator with a pointy mouth and monkey-like cheeks saw that Xiao Hua's cultivation wasn't inferior to his, he immediately escaped into the ground, wanting to catch him off guard. He originally wanted to sneak attack Xiao Hua, but when he saw the red-robed cultivator actually put the command tablet on the ground, he naturally didn't hesitate to take the command tablet away. According to this cultivator's thinking, he was at the 10th level of qi condensation and Xiao Hua was also at the 10th level of qi condensation. Not to mention whether or not Xiao Hua had an earth escape talisman, even if he did, he might not be able to catch up to him. Who would have thought that just as this 10th level cultivator fled for a moment, he heard Xiao Hua's eerie voice from above his head, "Fellow Daoist scheme, you actually dared to take the command tablet away from I didn't want to take your life." The monkey-faced cultivator suppressed his astonishment and let out a cold snort. He clapped his hands and took out several yellow talismans. However, just as he urged his magic power, an incomparably fierce force suddenly came from the space between his eyebrows. When he saw a black light instantly pierce through his earth escape talisman and the yellow talismans around him, he felt a pain between his eyebrows and immediately lost consciousness. Hey! What's going on? Xiao Hua drove the black iron needle into the cultivator's forehead, but a strange scene appeared. Just as the black iron needle pierced into the cultivator's forehead, the cultivator's body began to flicker. Just like the red-robed cultivator, the cultivator's body gradually disappeared, leaving behind 2 identical number plates in front of Xiao Hua's eyes. Oh, so that's the case. Xiao Hua put the 2 number plates into his storage bag and nodded slightly. The Imperial Thunder sect still has the intention of protecting the cultivators participating in the selection. Inside this illusion formation, even if you lose your life, you don't have to worry and will be immediately transported out. That's fine too. In this case, this young master also doesn't have any misgivings. At this moment, Xiao Hua was truly awe-inspiring. This was also the first time he could hold his head up high after hiding from the three sects of the state of Shi. His magic power was truly much higher than his peers. Dealing with the 6th and 10th level of Qi refining was simply as easy as reaching out his hand. Moreover, the reason why Qi refining cultivators became Qi refining cultivators was precisely because they drew the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into their body and refined it for their own use. This was merely the lowest level of cultivation. They could only rely on their magic power to drive the yellow talismans. Speaking of which, they couldn't even be considered to have crossed the threshold. Only after reaching the 12th level of Qi refining and beginning to possess divine sense could they begin to rely on their own magic power to cast spells. Only then could they be considered to have truly stepped into the threshold of cultivation. Although Xiao Hua was currently only at the 10th level of Qi refining, he was already able to cast spells. In these past 2 years, he had repeatedly read through the book of foundational spells he obtained from the Feng clan. He had long since practiced all the spells in the book to the point that he was thoroughly familiar with them. This Thunder Palm was actually the most powerful spell in the book. Today, he took it out very easily, making a profit. Immediately after, Xiao Hua randomly picked a direction and flew away. One after another, he found 2 cultivators around the 8th level of Qi refining. These 2 were tactful. Knowing that they couldn't contend against him, they obediently took out their number plates and withdrew from the illusion formation. Hehe, this is good. It's as easy as blowing off dust. Using reason to convince people, Xiao Hua somewhat enjoyed this feeling of being an expert. If nothing unexpected happens, this young master will soon be able to gather 12 number plate. However, this was often the case. The easier it felt, the easier it was for accidents to occur. In the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Xiao Hua didn't find another cultivator, regardless of whether they were high or low level. It was as if these cultivators were all hiding. Strange. Xiao Hua released all of his perception. He even looked underground, but he didn't have the slightest clue. Looking at the color of the sky, it was already extremely dark. Presumably, this was the darkness before dawn. Before long, the sun would rise from the east again. This is bad. Xiao Hua's heart jumped. His figure flew up into the air. Looking at the signal that was the closest to him, he sneered, "Damn it, it seems this young master wants to test his luck." At this moment, without waiting for Xiao Hua to urge his magic power, a faint divine sense swept past him from behind. It passed by Xiao Hua's body and immediately locked onto him. Soon after, in Xiao Hua's perception, another dozen or so cultivators appeared behind him. They quickly surrounded him from all directions. Xiao Hua coldly snorted. He waved his hand and took out the black iron needle from the space. He quietly sent it into the air. Soon after, he took the devil's spear and a large stack of fireball talismans in his hand. He pretended to be ignorant and flew forward. Fellow Daoist. Xiao Hua flew for a moment and sensed that the dozen or so cultivators had surrounded him. Then, he heard a warm voice call out from behind him. Xiao Hua turned around and frowned slightly. The 2 people who appeared behind him were none other than Ma Miaoming and Jiang Mingxiao. Ha ha ha. Ma Miaoming saw Xiao Hua and laughed happily. Fellow Daoist Jiang, it's this guy. I saw a few people outside the illusory formation. They were all very willing to submit to fellow Daoist Jiang. Only this guy ignored you. Hihi, everyone has their own ambitions. I have never forced anyone. Jiang Mingxiao smiled and waved her hand. What ambitions does he have? He's just a loose cultivator. Needless to say, he cultivated to this level by robbing cultivation techniques and spirit stones. Even if he wants to submit to fellow Daoist Jiang, we still have to carefully consider our own reputation. Ma Miaoming sneered. Fellow Daoist Ma, do you still remember that loose cultivator Chang Huan? How despicable and shameless. He treated fellow Daoist as his reborn parent. As soon as fellow Daoist left, he immediately. Fellow Daoist Ma. Jiang Mingxiao frowned with displeasure. Hihi, I know my wrongs, I know my wrongs. Ma Miaoming immediately flattered, fellow Daoist Jiang is a magnanimous person. You won't take this kind of trivial matter to heart, but I still feel indignant for fellow Daoist. Then, she looked at Xiao Hua and said, how could ordinary loose cultivators surpass the 7th layer of the Qi refining realm? If he didn't use despicable means, how could he reach the 10th layer of the Qi refining realm? If fellow Daoist Jiang makes a move, on one hand, we'll have another number plate. On the other hand, we can avenge the fellow Daoist who died in this guy's hand. I have my own ideas. Jiang Mingxiao waved her hand and stopped Ma Miaoming from speaking. She cupped her hands and said, I remember that fellow Daoist is called Xiao Hua, right? Yes, that's right. It's extremely difficult for loose cultivators to cultivate. This is common knowledge in the cultivation world. Joining the Imperial Thunder sect is fellow Daoist Xiao's best opportunity. This is already the last hurdle. Fellow Daoist Xiao only needs to obtain 12 number plates to fulfill his wish and become an official disciple of a major cultivation sect. In the future, he won't have to worry about spirit stones, medicinal pills, or cultivation techniques anymore. What do you mean, fellow Daoist Jiang? Xiao Hua was a little puzzled. Nothing. I just admire the willpower of loose cultivators like you. In a situation where you don't have anything, you actually managed to cultivate to the 10th layer of the Qi refining realm. If it's absolutely impossible. Therefore, I want to give fellow Daoist Xiao a chance. Oh, you still want I to follow fellow Daoist Jiang? Xiao Hua looked at Jiang Mingxiao with a faint smile. Yes, I naturally trust others, but fellow Daoist Xiao is a loose cultivator. Therefore, I ask fellow Daoist Xiao to swear a blood oath that in the future, you'll only follow I in the Imperial Thunder sect. If you do, I will spare your life and protect you. Who? Jiang Mingxiao was persuading Xiao Hua when suddenly, another divine sense swept over. Jiang Mingxiao frowned and scolded towards the source of the divine sense. Of course it's I. An extremely arrogant voice came. Then, more than 10 cultivators flew down from the east side of Xiao Hua. Wang family of Guangxian. Jiang Mingxiao sneered and said, fellow Daoist Chiming, can't you see that I am doing something here? Hihi, fellow Daoist Jiang, of course I can see you. Wang Chiming's face was sharp and thin, and he actually had a goatee under his chin. His eyes were slightly red, and he said with a sinister smile, the loose cultivators in this area have all been killed and those who should have fled have fled. It's hard to find an extra number plate. It's not easy to find an unguarded one here. I also came to take a look on behalf of my subordinate brothers. Fellow Daoist Wang. Jiang Mingxiao scolded, this fellow Daoist has already pledged his allegiance to I and his I's brother. This number plate. I'm afraid I can't give it to you. Is that so? Wang Chiming rolled his red eyes and said with a smile, it seems, this fellow Daoist hasn't agreed yet. Hihi, fellow Daoist Wang, do you think this fellow Daoist won't agree? Jiang Mingxiao looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. Xiao Hua stood there and looked at the two people coldly. When he saw Jiang Mingxiao laughing, a faint smile also appeared on his face. He cupped his hands and said, fellow Daoist Jiang, I'll let you know that I won't agree to this condition of being someone's servant. Ha! Jiang Mingxiao was laughing halfway, but at this moment, it was as if someone had grabbed his throat and he couldn't laugh anymore. A vicious expression appeared on his face. He clapped his hands and took out an earthen yellow sword talisman. He urged his transcendence energy, and the sword talisman suddenly expanded, becoming a huge sword more than half a foot wide. Jiang Mingxiao waved his hand and the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth was absorbed by the huge sword. Then, just as Jiang Mingxiao was about to use his divine sense to urge the huge sword, Xiao Hua's figure suddenly stood up and he sneered, you want me to pledge my allegiance with this little ability? Go home and cultivate for another 100 years. -6. Chapter 1527. After that, Xiao Hua didn't give Jiang Mingxiao any chance to swing his great sword. His entire body was like a gust of wind, and he instantly arrived in front of Jiang Mingxiao. Similarly, he waved his hand, and a dozen fireball talismans surrounded Jiang Mingxiao's body. Rumble. The fireball talismans were incomparably powerful. Not only did they blast Jiang Mingxiao to the point that he fled in a sorry state, they even disrupted the entire scene. Xiao Hua originally used the devil's spear tip in his hand, but just as he took it out, he remembered that there were many cultivators here. Moreover, even if he stabbed Jiang Mingxiao to death, he would only be teleported out of the illusory formation. The secret of his devil's spear tip couldn't be kept. Rather than that, he might as well not use it. Xiao Hua could be considered to have hit the mark by a fluke. Jiang Mingxiao was a mid-stage 11th stage qi refinement cultivator and already had divine sense. If Xiao Hua threw out the fireball talisman from afar, he absolutely couldn't get within 1 zhong of his body. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to succeed. At this time, even if Jiang Mingxiao had divine sense, the fireball talisman had already exploded within 1 kai of his body. He could only flee. Xiao Hua saw that Jiang Mingxiao's defense had been blown to pieces by the fireball talisman. His hands moved again, but right at this moment, an earth spike suddenly flew out from under his body and was about to pierce into the sole of his foot. Xiao Hua's figure flew again, dodging the earth spike. He turned his head to look at Wang Qiming, who was not far from him and had a trace of astonishment in his eyes. Damn it, this guy should have gone to sneak attack Jiang Mingxiao. Why did he attack me? Xiao Hua glanced at Wang Qiming. Although he was puzzled in his heart, he didn't pay much attention to him. Seeing that Wang Qiming had come to his senses and was forming another seal, wanting to attack him, Xiao Hua immediately circulated his magic power. His figure flashed as he closely chased after Jiang Mingxiao. Moreover, the fireball talismans in his hand shot out one after another. Jiang Mingxiao, who was fleeing in a sorry state, was incomparably depressed. He really didn't expect Xiao Hua to make the first move. Moreover, he absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua's speed to be so fast. The fireball talisman was of such a high level. For a moment, he lost the initiative and could only flee outside. He wanted to avoid the fireball talisman first, then use his divine sense to deal with Xiao Hua. However, the fireball talismans were endless, causing Jiang Mingxiao to almost vomit blood. Just as he steeled his heart, several net of ice talismans in his hand. He was prepared to take the opportunity to use his divine sense to resist the fireball talisman and take the opportunity to take his magic tool. When suddenly, a swift and fierce aura from the sky, very sharply, the yellow talismans, the talisman's talisman, of a sudden, of Estus, a sharp cheese sharp took the opportunity of stu of his own tool. Of course, of SS, S, I to SSS. Of Stu's SS heads of his S that of his of course, of hitus of his, he of his of. Hims when his, he, of. Me. Xiao Hua sensed the magic power of this of his magic power, and with a wave of his hand, a half-foot-long thunder palm shot out from his hand. It directly hit Wang Qiming's assess of his, and immediately broke the of his. At the same time, Jiang Mingxiao's figure disappeared. Crash! A series of sounds rang out, and unexpectedly, 14 number plates fell from midair. Xiao Hua was overjoyed. With a wave of his hand, the 14 number plates were all caught by him, and very nimbly, he put them into his storage pouch. From the moment Xiao Hua threw out the fireball talisman to the moment he used his black iron needle to kill Jiang Mingxiao, all of his movements were as quick as lightning, far exceeding the expectations of the crowd of cultivators. Therefore, no one expected these 14 number plates to be his. By the time they saw them clearly and their thoughts had just arisen, the number plates had already been put into Xiao Hua's storage pouch by Xiao Hua. Haha. The happiest of all was Wang Qiming. His entire thin face was flushed red. With a wave of his hand, he formed another seal, and his figure flew in the direction of Xiao Hua, chasing after him. However, something Wang Qiming didn't expect happened. Xiao Hua didn't flee. Instead, with a cold smile on his face, he actually rushed over just like him. This guy, actually isn't afraid of death. Wang Qiming's brain couldn't quite wrap itself around it. The confinement technique in his hand was still unleash. Crack. When Xiao Hua casually used a palm of thunder to break the confinement technique, Wang Qiming suddenly thought, this is bad. Jiang Mingxiao's cultivation is at the middle stage of the 11th layer of the qi refining realm. Just like me, he was killed by this guy. Wouldn't I also be no match for him? But, he's only at the 10th layer of the qi refining realm. Damn it, I actually still have to chase after him. Wang Qiming's brain reacted slowly, but his cultivation wasn't fake. When Wang Qiming came to his senses, his figure immediately rushed towards the sky, as if he wanted to change directions and avoid Xiao Hua. What a pity. Although he was at the 11th layer of the qi refining realm, a layer higher than Xiao Hua's realm, how could his flying talisman compare to Xiao Hua's flying technique? Just as he flew into the air, Xiao Hua's figure appeared behind him. Where do you think you're going? Xiao Hua asked indifferently. Xiao. Fellow Daoist Xiao, please spare my life. Wang Qiming couldn't bear it anymore and shouted loudly, I was possessed just now. I shouldn't have attacked fellow Daoist. Since fellow Daoist has already killed Jiang Mingxiao and collected all the number plates, please take pity on I. This little one only has 11 number plates. If fellow Daoist Xiao can let I go, I will enter the Imperial Thunder Sect. These cultivators in my hands will all be under fellow Daoist Xiao's command. The dozen or so cultivators under Jiang Mingxiao and Wang Qiming's command were all around the 8th layer of the qi refining realm. Under the might of Xiao Hua's dozens of fireball talismans, they had already hidden far away. They simply didn't have time to clearly see what was happening in the field. When the fireball talisman's raging flames disappeared, they saw a middle stage of the 11th layer of the qi refining realm being chased all over the sky by a late stage of the 10th layer of the qi refining realm. As he fled, he even begged for mercy. This situation, how could they not be shocked? This young master doesn't care. Xiao Hua sneered. If you dare to reach out to this young master, then you should be prepared to be killed by this young master. As Xiao Hua spoke, he also threw a large pile of fireball talismans at Wang Qiming's body. At this moment, Wang Qiming seemed to have come to his senses. This was an illusion formation, so there was no danger to his life. Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't intend to let him go, he stopped and clapped his hands. A magic tool in the shape of a gourd was taken out by him, urging his transcendence energy. A misty blue brilliance shot out from the gourd's mouth. From top to bottom, it gradually protected his entire body. The dozen or so fireballs exploded around the blue light, but they only shook the blue light back and forth. They couldn't harm Wang Qiming at all. Fellow Daoist Xiao. Wang Qiming's face had a trace of satisfaction. Seeing that the blue light had already merged together under his feet, his heart relaxed, and he opened his mouth to speak with a smile. It was also at this moment that a jet-black brilliance appeared under his feet. With lightning speed, it pierced the place where the blue light had just converged. The blue light only resisted slightly before it was immediately pierced by the brilliance. With a pu sound, that brilliance pierced into the sole of Wang Qiming's feet. Wang Qiming was stunned, and he unconsciously lowered his head. Unfortunately, before he could understand what was going on, his entire body swayed, and he slowly disappeared from where he was standing. Hua hua! A series of sounds rang out. Sure enough, 11 number plates scattered in midair. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to make a move, the dozen or so cultivators on the left were all moved. Each of them urged their flying talismans to rush towards those number plates. Xiao Hua wasn't nervous. He stood in midair with his hands behind his back, and he coldly laughed. I want to see who dares to take away these number plates under my eyes. Swoosh. All the cultivators immediately came to their senses and uniformly stood in midair, not daring to take even half a step forward. Xiao. Fellow Daoist Xiao, you already have 14 number plates. You're definitely going to be a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. A cultivator timidly said. These 11 number plates. Senior, please be merciful and give them to whoever you find pleasing to the eye. If we enter the Imperial Thunder Sect, we'll all follow fellow Daoist Xiao's lead. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and those 11 number plates fell into his storage bag. He looked around and shook his head. I have no interest in your so-called cultivation family's methods. You guys should go find your own opportunities. Everyone's face revealed regret, but seeing that it was getting late, they didn't dare to stay any longer. Just as they were about to fly away, they heard Xiao Hua say, fellow Daoist called Ma Miaoming, you don't need to leave. Leave your number plate behind and return to the Thunderclap Peak by yourself. You. Ma Miaoming already had a bad feeling in his heart. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, he bitterly smiled and said, fellow Daoist Xiao, I just want to protect myself. If I don't curry favor with Jiang Mingxiao, I also won't. Fellow Daoist Ma, there are thousands upon thousands of cultivation paths in the world. You can choose any one of them. Since you've chosen the path of relying on Jiang Mingxiao, you naturally have the awareness of your choice. In order to curry favor with Jiang Mingxiao, you dared to offend I, so you'll have to accept I's punishment. Xiao Hua indifferently said, fortunately, this is an illusion. You'll only leave your number plate behind as a lesson and won't lose your life. If you're outside the illusion array. Hee. This. Ma Miaoming looked at the crowd that had long since fled and sighed. He slapped his storage bag, and unexpectedly, there were 2 number plates inside. He bitterly smiled and said, I've worked hard for so long, but in the end, I've made wedding clothes for others. Forget it, forget it. As he spoke, Ma Miaoming took 2 steps forward, waved his hand, and the 2 number plates flew towards Xiao Hua. Seeing Ma Miaoming take 2 steps forward, Xiao Hua's eyes narrowed. He waved his hand, and the 2 number plates stopped in his hand. However, it only stopped for a moment. Then, Xiao Hua waved his hand again, and the 2 number plates suddenly flew behind Xiao Hua. Wu tilde a strange roar sounded. One of the 2 number plates suddenly turned into a long snake-like monster. It circled in the air and flew towards Xiao Hua. You. Ma Miaoming, who was in front of Xiao Hua, looked at Xiao Hua in surprise. You. How did you know? Mph, how I know is not important. What's important is, you missed the opportunity one gave you. Xiao Hua stood between Ma Miaoming and the other number plate, coldly looking at Ma Miaoming's gradually disappearing figure. That number plate was obviously Ma Miaoming's own number plate. He probably took it out to trick Xiao Hua, and the monster that pounced towards Xiao Hua also disappeared along with Ma Miaoming's disappearance. Opportunity? What opportunity? Ma Miaoming's figure disappeared, but he still didn't understand. -6. Chapter 1528. Cultivator aristocratic families are really unfathomable. Although Xiao Hua's expression didn't change as he watched the roaring monster gradually disappear, his heart had long since turned upside down. Let's not talk about being able to use a magic tool while still in the qi refining stage. Let's not talk about being able to teach a complete cultivation technique to the main family's disciples. Just this monster, that spirit-seeking talisman, that soul-absorbing bell, and other strange methods cannot be underestimated. That Jinghua City's Zhu clan, perhaps because they were in the limelight back then, they were able to shake the cultivator sects. That's why they suffered an unexpected calamity and were implanted with talismans. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua unconsciously pinched his chin. He was thinking a little too far. In the past 2 years, Xiao Hua had been practicing diligently, and at the same time, he had also taken out all the cultivation methods that he could practice and read them. He had basically finished reading the Zhu family's booklet. What was recorded in it was completely different from the cultivation methods and talismans of the current Xi country's cultivation world. It only talked about souls and talismans. It was also very different from the talismans that Xiao Hua had obtained from Xiao Nan's Cheng family. Although Xiao Hua could somewhat understand it, he was still more confused. Of course, that book didn't talk about talismans in detail. It only said that talismans were magical powers left behind from ancient times and were recorded in a strange language. That's all. Then, it talked about the Zhu clan's failed attempts to break talismans. Of course, from this little content, Xiao Hua faintly felt that these things were extremely useful. However, Xiao Hua didn't have the slightest clue as to where and how to use them. Perhaps, after I learn talismans in the future, I'll be able to thoroughly understand the secrets of this booklet and find the reason. Xiao Hua patted his forehead and bitterly smiled at his own thoughts. At this time, Xiao Hua had already obtained 26 number plates. Adding his own, that was a total of 27 number plates, more than double his previous estimate of 12 number plates. This harvest was more than enough for the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection this time. Xiao Hua also didn't want to attract too much attention, so he descended and sat on a large red rock, preparing to quietly wait for the arrival of dawn. However, just as Xiao Hua sat down, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Oh my, how could I forget Xue Xue? Recalling Xue Xue's rude and unreasonable appearance when she had just entered the illusion array, Xiao Hua couldn't help but think of Fairy Hongxia's beautiful and understanding eyes. And in front of Cai Hongfeng, Fairy Hongxia resolutely prepared to stand up for Xiao Hua, valiant and formidable. Maybe she has already joined the Huanhua sect. It's been 2 years since we last met, so she must have made a breakthrough in her cultivation. Let's just say she's in the 11th layer of qi refining. Thinking up to this point, Xiao Hua's heart seemed to be filled with lofty sentiments. He couldn't sit still anymore. Clenching his fists, he stood up and laughed brightly. Damn it, I'm also in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. From today onwards, I'm no longer a toad. A white swan. Can I eat your flesh? At this moment, Xiao Hua seemed to have changed into another person. His face once again carried a trace of laziness and confidence, and there was even a hint of craftiness in his eyes. It was a far cry from the previous Xiao Hua's deadpan appearance. It was also this strange temperament that caused Xue Xue's heart to be instantly planted with feelings. This was much more lethal than any pretty boy. Concubine, dual cultivation, concubine. Xiao Hua didn't know why, but he suddenly thought of the immortal beauty sect that Xue Xue had mentioned. In his mind, Xue Xue's figure and Fairy Hongxia's face also appeared. Oh my, this isn't some inner demon, right? Xiao Hua hurriedly gathered his thoughts and thought to himself, Xue Xue doesn't know. She thinks that I've recovered my cultivation within 2 years. But in reality, I've cultivated from the 4th layer of qi refining all the way to the 10th layer of qi refining without any bottlenecks or sluggishness. This inner demon. I really have to be careful. Let's not talk about this for now. I'd better go find Xue Xue. After all, I came here with her. Don't hurt her heart. Xiao Hua urged his transcendence energy and used the flight technique. Just as he was about to fly into the air, 2 divine senses swept over from his left. When they saw Xiao Hua, they immediately locked onto him. There really are people who aren't afraid of death. Xiao Hua also used his perception to sweep the area. He immediately understood that these 2 were also 11th layer aura refining cultivators. Surrounding the 2 of them were several dozen 9th and 10th layer aura refining cultivators. Although Xiao Hua's divine sense couldn't see the people clearly, it was very easy for him to see through everyone's cultivation levels. These 2 clearly came prepared. As soon as their divine senses locked onto Xiao Hua, they each took out 2 different yellow talismans. They spat out a mouthful of blood essence and stuck the talismans on their bodies. A rather strange fluctuation emerged from their blood vessels and stimulated their meridians. As a result, their transcendence energy suddenly increased by more than 30% compared to before. Strange. As Xiao Hua sensed, he suddenly remembered that he was still thinking about the secrets of the cultivation families. He couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. He wasn't afraid of 11th layer qi refining cultivators, but the problem was that these were 2 11th layer qi refining cultivators. Moreover, they both had secret magic tools. Look, one was shaped like an alms bowl, the other was shaped like a small pagoda. Under the urging of the 2's transcendence energy, they emitted different scattered lights and flew towards Xiao Hua following their divine senses. Moreover, the dozens of 9th and 10th layer qi refining cultivators surrounding these 2 cultivators were like hungry wolves who saw a little sheep. All kinds of yellow talismans were raised in their hands and urged the flight talismans to fly over like a swarm of bees. Xiao Hua wasn't willing to fight against these people. Mph, isn't it just 20 or so number plates? This young master wants you to watch so you won't be able to eat them. Xiao Hua coldly snorted. He formed a hand seal and his figure drilled into the ground. In front of 4 foundation establishment cultivators, Xiao Hua could easily escape. Now, facing 11th layer qi refining cultivators, Xiao Hua simply didn't have any burden. Fellow Daoist Yuan, this guy has an Earth Escape talisman. A delicate, baby-faced cultivator with delicate features formed a hand seal to activate the small arms bowl and shouted with some astonishment. Hee, fellow Daoist minute, eyes incompetent, I'll go first. The other square-faced cultivator with a somewhat dull appearance activated the small pagoda. He slapped his hand and took out an Earth Escape talisman from his storage pouch and said, I just so happen to have a few Earth Escape talismans. Fellow Daoist Yuan, please wait. Fellow Daoist minute frowned and said, from what the other fellow Daoist just said, this guy has some divine abilities. Jiang Mingxiao and Wang Qiming of Guangxian were eliminated by this guy. If we didn't join forces, I'm afraid we'd have to be very careful. This fellow Daoist Yuan slightly hesitated. He slapped his hand and took out another Earth Escape talisman and threw it to fellow Daoist minute, saying, fellow Daoist minute, I'll give you an Earth Escape talisman. This is Xiao Hua's number plate. Haha, no need. Fellow Daoist Yuan waved his hand and the Earth Escape talisman flew back to fellow Daoist minute. Fellow Daoist Yuan turned his head and said, if any fellow Daoist has extra Earth Escape talismans, I'll give you the first number plate. I have one. Just as fellow Daoist Yuan finished speaking, a cultivator took out several Earth Escape talismans from his storage pouch and handed them over. This cultivator was the one who followed Jiang Mingxiao from the Chonglian village. Good, fellow Daoist fan, if I gets the number plate, you too won't be able to escape. Fellow Daoist Yuan was overjoyed and reached out to catch it. He slapped his hand and pointed with his finger. The arms bowl flashed and fell into fellow Daoist Yuan's hand. He looked at fellow Daoist minute and smiled. Shall we go down now? Hee, please. Fellow Daoist minute also put away the small pagoda. The two of them flashed and chased down from different directions. Fellow Daoist fan still had some Earth Escape talismans and loudly asked, what should we do? Fellow Daoist Yuan said, if you want to come, then come. Whoever contributed the most would get the most. There are more than 20 number plates. Fellow Daoist minute smiled brightly and had already entered the earth. However, fellow Daoist fan and the other cultivators looked at each other. None of them dared to rashly fly down. After all, there weren't many cultivators with Earth Escape talismans, not even 40% of them. They wouldn't be willing to team up and chase down a cultivator who could kill an 11th layer qi condensation cultivator even if they had 10 times the courage. Fellow Daoist fan hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, we'll just wait here. If fellow Daoist Yuan and fellow Daoist minute succeed, then we'll get some benefits. If not, then we'll think of something else. Another way. Everyone's hearts trembled when they heard this. They looked around and quickly flew to a place where there was no one around. What else could they do? In order to protect themselves, they first sought the protection of an 11th layer qi condensation cultivator. Then, with the help of the 11th layer qi condensation cultivator's divine sense, they hunted down stray cultivators. Although they killed a lot of them, in the end, there was still a limit. They had gathered all the number plates of the 11th layer qi condensation cultivators, but they still didn't have enough. In the end, there were no more cultivators to kill, so they could only kill each other. For example, if fellow Daoist fan hadn't revealed Xiao Hua's information, his number plate would have been snatched away by someone else long ago. Everyone was on guard, yellow talismans in hand. Not only were they looking at each other, but they were also staring at the ground, ready to be summoned by the two 11th layer qi condensation cultivators at any time. At this moment, the air was still clear, and the horizon was faintly white. This was the sign of dawn. If nothing unexpected happened, after a meal, the light of dawn would appear, and the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection would come to an end. Seeing the anxiety in everyone's hearts, a few of the more quick-witted ones had other ideas. But at this moment, from the ground beneath everyone's feet, a jet-black brilliance suddenly shot out. With lightning speed, it stabbed into fellow Daoist Fan's feet. Fellow Daoist Fan didn't even have time to react. The Iron Cloak talisman and other defensive yellow talismans on his body were pierced. As the faint brilliance flickered, fellow Daoist Fan only had time to put on a look of astonishment. His entire body began to sway and gradually disappeared. Bang! At the same time fellow Daoist Fan disappeared, a number plate appeared in midair. Haha tilde the fat cultivator closest to fellow Daoist Fan already had some yellow talismans in his hand. When he saw the number plate appear, he grinned and threw the yellow talismans in his hand, forcing the surrounding cultivators to retreat. He flew a few steps forward and reached out to grab the number plate. But just as his hand touched the number plate, a cold voice sounded in his ear. "You dare to take this young master's things?" -6. Chapter 1529. Ah! This voice was very unfamiliar, but in the fat cultivator's ears, it was no less than a clap of thunder. "Senior, please spare my life." The fat cultivator hastily withdrew his hand, but it was already too late. The jet-black brilliance that had just killed fellow Daoist Fan had returned. In the blink of an eye, it had pierced between the fat cultivator's eyebrows. The fat cultivator naturally wouldn't allow himself to be captured without putting up a fight. He flung out a yellow talisman in his hand, and an ice net talisman appeared in front of him. Catcher! The ice net talisman didn't seem to be able to block the sharp black iron needle in the slightest. The fat cultivator only felt his vision darken, and he was transported back to the thunderclap peak. Damn it, this guy, who is he? So powerful. So fast. When his figure landed on the thunderclap peak, the fat cultivator still hadn't seen who had eliminated him. Within the illusory formation, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the two number plates fell into his storage pouch. At the same time, two flustered and exasperated voices came from the ground beneath his feet. "Xiao Hua, if you have the ability, don't run. Don't run. You think this young master is a fool." The corners of Xiao Hua's mouth revealed a trace of a sneer. His figure suddenly flew up, and with a wave of his hand, the black iron needle appeared in the air again, killing a 7th level Qi refining cultivator. After taking a number plate, it flew in a certain direction. Behind Xiao Hua were several tens of cultivators who were in a mess. At this moment, these cultivators couldn't help but make a move. Each of them took out their most convenient yellow talismans and methods. There were even a few people who took out their ancestral magic tools. They wanted to fight to the death when the sun rose from the east and see if they could gather enough number plate. When fellow Daoist Yuan and fellow Daoist Minute flashed out from the ground, they saw the chaotic scene. They wanted to berate them, but they tacitly kept their mouths shut. This was their final method to deal with the problem. Although they arrived a bit earlier, they still arrived. "Fellow Daoist Yuan, should we still chase?" Fellow Daoist Minute glanced at the distant Xiao Hua's figure, which wasn't very fast, and whispered, "Still chase? My brain isn't sick." Fellow Daoist Yuan's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise, and he said, "This Xiao Hua already has enough number plates. He was still able to escape under the joint efforts of the two of us. He is definitely a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Since we are going to cultivate in the same sect in the future, how can we not form good karma? If we force them into a corner and force them to use whatever means they have, we will end up in a lose-lose situation." Then, he looked at the chaos beneath his feet. "Isn't this the best time to solve our problem?" Fellow Daoist Minute clapped his hands and said, "Great. I have the same idea." Then, the two of them stood with their hands clasped behind their backs and quietly watched the fight in the field. But the distant Xiao Hua was at a loss. He used his perception to sweep over and over again, cursing in his heart, "Motherfuckers, why don't you chase after me? I'm still waiting to teach you a lesson." As he said this, he waved his hand, and the black iron needle flashed out from the rock behind him, flying into Xiao Hua's hand at an extremely fast speed. Since the two 11th layer Qi refining cultivators didn't want to trouble Xiao Hua, and Xiao Hua himself didn't have any desire to win, the two of them joining forces could still put up a fight against Xiao Hua. If Xiao Hua didn't reveal his trump card, he would only be able to fight to a draw. There was no need to haggle over this any further. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua released his perception. His figure leisurely floated up, and he flew in a certain direction. At this moment, the sky was about to brighten. All the cultivators knew this was their last chance. Almost all the temporary small groups were in conflict. Of the 15 11th layer Qi refining cultivators, 2 had been eliminated by Xiao Hua, so there were still 13 left. These cultivators had already obtained a number plate that allowed them to pass the test. Some of them even seized a lot of number plates in order to gain the favor of the masters of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Of course, these cultivators had some close friends with them, and for the sake of their future cultivation in the Imperial Thunder Sect, they also gave some number plates to these people. Xiao Hua's dazed search naturally attracted the attention of many cultivators. Among these cultivators, the majority of them already knew something from Xiao Hua's leisurely appearance. Looking at his peak 10th layer Qi refining cultivation, they didn't dare to harass him. As soon as they saw Xiao Hua, they immediately ran far away, afraid that Xiao Hua would snatch away their number plates. Of course, there was still a small group of cultivators who had no other choice, or perhaps there was something wrong with their heads. Even though they knew they were no match for Xiao Hua, they still teamed up to attack Xiao Hua. This was because they also understood that Xiao Hua and the others definitely had 10 similar number plates in their storage pouches. As long as they had a chance, someone would immediately obtain a rare opportunity. Therefore, even though Xiao Hua didn't want to make a move, he still added another 13 number plates. When Xiao Hua flew to the top of a steep mountain, a bright red sun slowly rose from the east, illuminating the entire illusory realm with a dazzling light. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The mountains shook and the earth quaked. Countless mountain ranges began to sink, and countless forests gushed out from the ground. Following the changes in the illusory realm, many cultivators who used Earth Escape talismans were pushed out from the ground by the formation. It's her. Hurry. Just a moment ago, when I killed a cultivator, 7 or 8 number plates fell from that person's body. This cultivator took advantage of Ai's inattention and scuttled out from the ground, taking away all of those number plate. A coarse voice shouted, "Now I still lack 3 number plates. Fellow Daoist, help I kill this cultivator, and I will give the other 5 number plates to him." Hehe, this cultivator is actually interesting. Xiao Hua's mouth held a smile, and he inwardly said, "Why is it similar to this young master's previous behavior? As long as I get a good deal, I'll immediately run far away. This cultivator who had his number plate stolen. I'm afraid he doesn't have an Earth Escape talisman, right?" While thinking, Xiao Hua inadvertently swept his perception over, but when he sensed Shue's very familiar magic power fluctuations, his heart immediately jumped. Without the slightest hesitation, he released the black iron needle. In the distance, Shue was also in a critical situation. Her cultivation was just at the 7th level of Qi refining, far from enough in this illusory realm. Fortunately, she had an Earth Escape talisman on her, so she could hide underground. Of course, the most important thing was that she was born in a cultivation family. Misty Mountain naturally had a few ancestral magic tools for her to use. One was a magic tool that could conceal magic power, and the other was a bewildering cloak, which could protect her completely. Of course, if it was only like this, she was afraid she would only be able to see Xiao Hua after sunrise. If Xiao Hua had more number plates, he might be able to give them to her, but most likely, that was impossible. Therefore, Shue also had her own plans. She relied on her magic tool to walk under the feet of others, always paying attention to the movements on the ground. Just now, when Xiao Hua heard that cultivator with the loud voice, he also deserved it. This guy also exhausted his mental and physical strength to use a magic tool to kill a cultivator whose cultivation was about the same as his own. Moreover, 8 number plates fell from that cultivator's body, which really made him overjoyed. In the end, this guy was in a daze, giving Shue, who had been coveting their fight underground for a long time, an opportunity. She was just a bit faster than that cultivator with the loud voice. Shue took the 8 number plates into her pouch, and in addition, in order to escape, she suffered a blow from the other party's magic tool, seriously injuring her body. In the future, she could only barely maintain her strength and hide underground. If she wanted to wait until sunrise, she would have the opportunity to strive for the top 100 with the 9-number plate. However, things didn't go as she wished. In the end, this illusory formation still had to move mountains and overturn seas to restore it to its original state. Shweshwe's magic power was already insufficient, so she was even more unable to resist the repelling force underground. Like the others, she was sent out of the ground. Of course, a cultivator with magic power like her basically didn't exist in this illusory formation. Even if she only had 1-number plate, she would still be killed by others. Moreover, she just so happened to run into an enemy. She saw that cultivator with the loud voice activate his magic tool, and a round, large copper hammer-like magic tool struck down from the sky. Before it could even get close to Tenjong, the whistling sound of the wind enveloped Shweshwe. At the side, several other cultivators around the 9th layer of Qi refining also had smiles on their faces. Each of them used their divine abilities, sending yellow talismans and magic tools to greet Shweshwe's body. They didn't have any intention of showing mercy to a woman. Alas, yesterday's fun, today's sad memories, this place is still here, people are not the people of yesterday. Thanks for the memory, the wrong poem, I wish him good luck. Shweshwe saw the vicious methods of the crowd, and her heart felt a burst of sadness. She was too lazy to summon the magic tool in her hand, and silently recited a few lines of the poem. Her body stopped in the air, and her eyes looked towards the horizon where the sun was rising from the east. Her face was indifferent. Ah! Just as Shweshwe was about to give up, a despairing howl echoed out. Under the golden rays of the sun, a lightning-like black ray mysteriously flashed through the eyes of the loud voice. Following the disappearance of the loud voice, the bronze hammer that was less than a meter away from Shweshwe's forehead slowly disappeared. Moreover, the loud voice didn't lie. From the place where he disappeared, there really were 7-number plates that fell out. At this moment, the eyes of the cultivators that attacked Shweshwe emitted a green light. The magic tools and yellow talismans that were attacking Shweshwe naturally wouldn't be retracted, and the cultivators themselves flew towards those number plate. A voice that Shweshwe was familiar with descended from the sky. Immediately after, a sentence that Shweshwe had never heard before, but from now on, she was afraid that she would frequently hear it resounded throughout the entire place. These are this young master's things, I want to see who dares to touch them. Xiao Hua. Shweshwe groaned in her heart, and slightly turned her head. Looking at Xiao Hua who was flying towards her from the horizon, she made a very strange movement. Shweshwe. She actually didn't care about the magic tools that were attacking her, and instead raised her hand, and very attentively combed the messy hair in front of her forehead. Ah! There's no mistake, right? Seeing this, Xiao Hua couldn't help but stare blankly. He killed that cultivator with the loud voice, of course, because he wanted to let Shweshwe block some of the remaining magic tools and yellow talismans. Who would have thought that the other party's big sister would actually a woman doll herself up for her lover? How could Xiao Hua not vomit blood? This. What kind of situation is this? You're actually still thinking about this. Xiao Hua truly understood what a female cultivator was. -6. Chapter 1530. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's black iron needle had already flown to Shweshwe's left side. Xiao Hua tried his best to fly to Shweshwe's side while controlling the black iron needle to break the magic tools and yellow talismans one by one. It has to be said that this black iron needle is really powerful. Not only can it break the defensive yellow talismans on a cultivator's body, it is also not at a disadvantage against other people's magic tools. The only thing that makes Xiao Hua unhappy is that this black iron needle is still too light. When it fights against magic tools, it seems light as a feather. Seeing Xiao Hua descend like a god, Shweshwe revealed a smile. Xiao Hua, you came? Hehe, if you were half a step late, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to see me. As she spoke, her body slightly swayed and her eyes slightly closed, as if she was about to fall from the sky. Ao tilde Xiao Hua didn't dare to be careless. He quickly flew up and grabbed Xue Xue's arm. Xue Xue leaned on Xiao Hua's shoulder. Xiao Hua was a bit uncomfortable. He slightly used his arm and only gave it to Xue Xue. Xue Xue nestled next to Xiao Hua's arm. She seemed to be seriously injured, but her slightly opened eyes flashed with joy that others didn't know. Xiao Hua grabbed Xue Xue's arm with one hand and patted with the other hand. Dozens of top-quality fireball talismans were taken out and shot out like a fairy scattering flowers. He already had experience controlling black iron needles, so controlling these fireball talismans was simply a piece of cake. At this time, those cultivators also put those number plates into their storage pouches. They hurriedly took out fireball talismans, icicle talismans, and other yellow talismans from their storage pouches. There were even other high-level yellow talismans and magic tools to fight against the exploding fireballs that filled the air. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Loud sounds came one after another, blasting these cultivators into dust. They were not stingy with these fireball talismans. Those fireball talismans couldn't hurt them, but they were still in a difficult situation, right? Of course, the most important thing was that within these fireball talismans, Xiao Hua's black iron needles began to display their might again. These cultivators were all in the 9th and 10th layer of the Qi refining realm. They were far from having divine sense, so the speed of the black iron needles was absolutely not something they could perceive. Following the explosion of the fireball talismans and Xiao Hua's use of this chaos, miserable screams and disbelief were transmitted from the chaos. The magic tools and yellow talismans attacking Xiao Hua and Xue Xue also gradually disappeared. After the power of the fireball talisman passed, there were still traces of heat waves in the air. Only 22 number plates were left scattered in the air. At this moment, an 11th level Qi refining cultivator slowly appeared in front of Xiao Hua. It was a handsome young man. He wasn't very tall, but his face was somewhat arrogant. He wore a rarely seen white daoist robe. Invisibility talisman? Xiao Hua's eyes slightly narrowed. He seemed to know that those cultivators from earlier should have been recruited by this 11th level Qi condensation cultivator. Xiao Hua's figure did not move. The black iron needle also stopped above the number plate. He coldly looked at the white-clothed cultivator. The white-clothed cultivator also looked at Xiao Hua. At the same time, his divine sense swept over and locked onto the black iron needle. It seemed to be a type of compromise, and also seemed to have seen the power of the black iron needle. The white-clothed cultivator's eyes flashed. His entire figure once again concealed itself in the air, but it was unknown where he went. Once the white-clothed cultivator left, Xiao Hua released his perception. He looked again and again, but he still didn't find any clues. Granny. This young master was truly a bit careless. Just now, when I killed a few 11th level Qi refining cultivators, I already felt invincible. If this guy used an invisibility talisman and rashly attacked me, it's really hard to say what the result would be. Xiao Hua was somewhat afraid. He waved his hand and the 22 number plates flew into his hand. Xue Xue. Xiao Hua used his arm to nudge Xue Xue. He called out, "The third trial is about to end. Why haven't you taken the number plates yet?" Sure enough, Xue Xue struggled to straighten her body. She waved her hand and 3 number plates flew into her hand. She weakly said, "I only need 3 millimeter." He nodded. Those 19 number plates were also put into his storage pouch. Swoosh tilde just as Xiao Hua put away the number plates, 2 multicolored lights flashed in the air, enveloping Xiao Hua and Xue Xue. After a while, the scenery changed. When everything stopped, Xiao Hua and Xue Xue once again appeared in the open space of Seeking Thunder Valley. The thunderboat that previously sent everyone here had already stopped in midair above the open space. Fellow Taoists, this time, the disciple selection of my Imperial Thunder Sect has officially ended. Everyone, please properly keep the number plates you received. Do not take them out by any means. Otherwise, you will be immediately expelled. Although the voice was slightly immature, it was very strict. The people who had just been transported out didn't dare to do anything. As for the people who had been eliminated before, Xiao Hua looked at the open space and didn't see any traces of them. Presumably, The Imperial Thunder Sect had already made arrangement. Fellow Taoists, please board the Thunder Boat. After 15 minutes, the restriction here will take effect. If any fellow Taoists still want to train in seeking Thunder Valley, then properly stay here. The voice unexpectedly relaxed and said a witty sentence. Naturally, after this voice finished shouting, all the cultivators on the open space, regardless of whether their faces were indifferent, tranquil, excited, vexed, regretful, perturbed, or other kinds of emotions, urged their magic power and flew onto the Thunder Boat one after another. Xue Xue was even more so. Her body leaned against Xiao Hua, her arm tightly attached to Xiao Hua's arm. She simply didn't use a trace of magic power. Looking at her moist big eyes, it was clearly a kind of innocence. It seemed to be saying, heavily injured, powerless, please. Xiao Hua shrugged. He felt a burst of panic for no reason. Although Xue Xue was voluptuous, her weight was still a lot worse than the tip of the devil's spear. Xiao Hua urged his magic power. His figure very leisurely landed on the Thunder Boat. Beside him, that white-clothed cultivator also landed. Seeing Xiao Hua and then looking at Xue Xue beside Xiao Hua, that white-clothed cultivator cupped his hands and said with a smile, I am Zhe Kang King Yun Xiao. Congratulations to junior brother for entering the Imperial Thunder Sect. In the future, we will all be fellow disciples of the same sect. Junior brother, please take care of us in the future. Afterwards, without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, he looked left and right and said in a low voice, Junior sister, if your injuries aren't heavy, stand up for the time being. Otherwise, if by any chance you are disliked by some master, a punishment for no reason is not worth it. Xue Xue's face slightly reddened. She hurriedly straightened up and left Xiao Hua's arm. Xiao Hua let out a sigh of relief. He felt that fighting against an 11th level Qi refinement cultivator was more exhausting. He also cupped his hands and said, I am Xiao Hua. Greetings to senior brother Wang. Disciple is a loose cultivator. My knowledge is shallow. Loose cultivator? Wang Yunxiao's face was extremely moved. He looked Xiao Hua up and down and said with a sigh, Junior brother Xiao is a talent with outstanding aptitude. When you entered, you were buried among loose cultivators. If it wasn't for the fact that the Imperial Thunder Sect didn't stick to one pattern in selecting disciples this time, junior brother Xiao, I'm afraid you would be a pearl cast into darkness for a lifetime. Hearing Wang Yunxiao's words, Xiao Hua's heart was moved. He asked curiously, when other sects recruit disciples, as long as they are above the 10th level of Qi refinement, could it be that there is something special about the Imperial Thunder Sect? A strange expression appeared on Wang Yunxiao's face. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a voice call out, Fellow Taoists, you can rest in your places and take medicinal pills. We'll bring you all to Zhen Lei Palace now. Zhen Lei Palace? Wang Yunxiao's face showed joy. He looked at Xiao Hua and cupped his hands. Without saying anything, he sat down and began to meditate. Xue Xue was already injured in the illusion. Naturally, she took medicinal pills and guided the medicinal power to nourish her meridians. Seeing that everyone was sitting cross-legged, Xiao Hua had no choice but to sit down and silently use his cultivation method. Not long after, a huge mountain peak appeared in front of them. On the mountain peak, there were many palaces and countless pavilions. Many immortal birds and immortal beasts leisurely strolled in the forest. In the forest, there were many exotic flowers and plants that bloomed. The Thunder Boat gradually slowed down and landed in front of a majestic palace. In the palace's square, there were many young cultivators. Some of them were in the 7th level of Qi refinement, while others were in the 90th level of Qi refinement. They were all standing solemnly. Opposite these young cultivators were even more children. Their cultivation levels ranged from the 1st level to the 6th level. These children were standing in a neat formation, but how could they stand still? Some were playing, some were sitting, and many were even playing with yellow talismans. Of course, the Thunder Boat's landing attracted everyone's attention. Many young children were running after the Thunder Boat. Some of them even wanted to use their flying talismans to fly into the air. Cough cough. There was a low cough and a slightly old voice said, Disciples on duty, why aren't you hurrying to maintain order? Although it's a rare happy day for our Imperial Thunder sect, we must remember the sect's rules. Immediately, dozens of young cultivators flew up and stopped these children. Although these children were naturally playful, they still had rules. When they saw their senior brothers fly up, they all obediently returned to their positions. They all stood with their hands behind their backs and pretended to be serious. Xiao Hua and the others stood on the thunderboat. Seeing the lively scene in front of them, a warm feeling rose in their hearts. Especially Xiao Hua, it was as if he saw the scene in Yellow Flower Ridge a few years ago. Instantly, his nose turned sour and his eyes filled with tears. The thunder boat landed. A tall and thin cultivator flew up to the thunder boat and scanned it with his divine sense. He smiled and said, "I am Gen I, the deacon of Gen Lei Palace. In the future, I will be the martial uncle of 100 of you. Today, I will be in charge of the disciples entering the sect. Greetings, Martial Uncle Gen." A few clever disciples began to bow and greet him. "Hehe, it's too early to call me that." Gen waved his hand and said, "All of you, get off the thunderboat and follow the disciples to the side hall of Gen Lei Palace to register your number plates. At the same time, you can also test your bone age." "Yes, we will follow Martial Uncle Gen's orders." A few 11th level Qi refining cultivators bowed and jumped off the thunderboat. Of course, a few disciples below led them to Gen Lei Palace. Shue. Xiao Hua and Shue jumped off the lightning boat. Just as Xiao Hua was about to ask, a few young girls from the lightning conversion palace ran over and giggled. "Fellow Daoist, the female cultivator is going to the other side hall. She definitely can't be together with these stinky men." -6. Chapter 1531. Ah! Stinky man. Xiao Hua's eyes widened as he looked at these girls in disbelief. He didn't know what to say. "Hurry up and leave." One of the girls disdainfully glared at Xiao Hua, then pulled Shue's hand and said, "Sister, let's wait for the other sisters here. Ian, I'll listen to junior sister's instructions." Shue was the sweetest. She immediately smiled and gave Xiao Hua a look. Okay, Xiao Hua was defeated by this girl in his heart. He nodded and chased after Wang Yunxiao. He asked in a low voice, "Senior brother Wang, what's the bone age test for?" Knowing that Xiao Hua was a loose cultivator, Wang Yunxiao was not surprised. He smiled and said, "The bone age test is to see how old fellow Daoist is." Oh. Xiao Hua was somewhat enlightened. "Hehe, I'm a cultivator in the cultivation world, but it's not easy to tell my age from my appearance. Take me for example. When I was young, I ate some strange herbs, which helped me retain my youthful appearance. I look like I'm in my 20s, but in fact, I'm already 32 years old. Therefore, when a cultivation sect recruits disciples, the disciples who pass the selection must have their bone age tested to find out their true age. If they are too old, even if their cultivation meets the requirements, they still can't be selected. Junior brother Xiao, think about it. If it's a 60-year-old cultivator at the late stage of Qi refining, would the Imperial Thunder sect accept them? So it's like this." Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat. He was slightly uneasy. Look at junior brother Xiao's young appearance. On the surface, you look like you're only 17 or 18 years old. Hehe, how can you cultivate to the 10th level of Qi refining at this age? Fellow Daoist Xiao should have the same opportunity as me, right? Wang Yunxiao smiled thoughtfully. Hehe. Xiao Hua only smiled and didn't say anything. Wang Yunxiao also didn't ask. The bone age test was about to begin, so Xiao Hua's age wouldn't be a secret. Oh, that's right. Junior brother Xiao, the Imperial Thunder sect, seems to have a rule. Wang Yunxiao suddenly said, "It said that only cultivators above 35 years old will be accepted into the sect unless they are foundation building." What? Xiao Hua stared blankly. He almost stood still and said in a low voice, "Why is there such a strange condition?" Wang Yunxiao's eyes flashed with understanding. He smiled and said, "Good for you to know, junior brother Xiao. In a normal cultivation sect, a disciple of the 12th layer should be around 38 years old. Even so, Only 60% of these disciples can reach the late stage of the 12th layer, and only 30% can reach the foundation establishment stage. So low? Xiao Hua exclaimed in a low voice. He felt that the disciples of cultivation sects seemed to be able to cultivate to the foundation establishment stage. Haha, fellow Daoist Xiao, if every disciple in a cultivation sect is able to reach foundation establishment, then wouldn't our Dawn Rain continent be filled with foundation establishment cultivators? Can it still be as rare as it is now? Wang Yunxiao said with a smile, it's precisely because foundation establishment is so difficult that those disciples over the age of 40, even if they cultivate to the late stage of the 12th layer of qi refining, they basically have no chance of breaking through to foundation establishment. Think about it, if a 35-year-old cultivator enters a cultivation sect, what kind of benefits can he bring to the cultivation sect? Xiao Hua suddenly understood. That's right, even if a 35-year-old middle-stage qi refining cultivator enters the Imperial Thunder sect, he would only have 5 years to break through to foundation establishment. And from the middle stage of the 11th layer to the peak of the 12th layer, even a disciple who has been nurtured since childhood would need 5 to 10 years. How can a disciple who just entered the sect successfully enter foundation establishment? Since he can't enter foundation establishment, why would they still want this kind of disciple? Damn it, just how old is this young master? Xiao Hua's heart began to beat faster. Seeing Xiao Hua's expression change again, Wang Yunxiao didn't say anything else and slowly walked into the side hall of Zhenlei Palace. Although the side hall of Zhenlei Palace was called a side hall, in reality, it was equally majestic. The carved beams and painted pillars were incomparably exquisite. Countless talismans faintly flashed on the pillars, beams, doors, and windows. The various colors of light were very harmonious. It was unknown where the light came from, but it illuminated the entire side hall. Xiao Hua followed Wang Yunxiao into the side chamber. At this time, the entire side chamber had more than 10 dark green tables arranged in an orderly manner on both sides of the side chamber. Behind each table, there was a late-stage foundation establishment realm old man sitting cross-legged. When Xiao Hua entered, there was a cultivator in front of each table. These cultivators were sitting cross-legged in front of the tables. Those foundation establishment old men looked at them with their eyes, swept them with their divine sense, and even walked up to them and used their hands to pinch them. Then, with a wave of their hand, a different colored light flashed. Some things were recorded in the jade slips in their hands. Finally, they waved their hands and let the cultivators who were tested leave from the other side of the side hall. Not long after, it was Xiao Hua's turn. Xiao Hua very nervously walked in front of an old man with white hair and a youthful complexion. He bowed and saluted. Junior Xiao Hua greets Senior. Ian, sit down first. That old man looked up and said indifferently, you don't need to panic. Even if you've eaten strange herbs and your age is a bit old, that's your fate. Even if you can't cultivate, there's still the riches and honor of the mortal world. Go and pursue them on your own. Yes, Junior understands. Xiao Hua respectfully sat in front of the table. Just like before, the old man carefully looked at Xiao Hua from head to toe. His eyes revealed a trace of surprise. Then, an abundant divine sense locked onto Xiao Hua and enveloped him from head to toe. Xiao Hua's heart moved. He also released his perception. Sure enough, that old man didn't notice. The old man's divine sense released a trace of strange fluctuation. It was through Xiao Hua's bones. It should be the Imperial Thunder sect's so-called bone testing technique. Ayo! That old man looked at Xiao Hua's bones from head to toe several times. He couldn't help but cry out, strange, there's something wrong with your bone age. Ah! Xiao Hua's head began to sweat. He felt his perception withdraw and asked nervously, Junior, how old is Junior? Ian, you seem to be several hundred years old, or perhaps 1,000 years old, but you also seem to be 4, 5, or 18 years old. The foundation establishment old man said very casually, but as soon as he said it, he realized something and berated, you don't know how old you are? You actually have to ask this old man. Hehe, Junior is 23 years old this year. Of course I know. Xiao Hua's heart moved and he laughed. Chumph, Do I need you to tell me? That foundation establishment old man stood up, stretched out his hand, and touched all the bones in Xiao Hua's body. He touched no less than, in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, almost all the bones in Xiao Hua's body were touched. This time, he withdrew his hand in satisfaction. He glared at Xiao Hua and scolded jokingly, "You actually dare to make fun of this old man. When there's time in the future, this old man will take care of you, brat." Xiao Hua turned pale with fright. He asked urgently, "Junior, how old is Junior?" At this time, in the distance, Wang Yunxiao had already finished measuring his bone age. Looking at Xiao Hua, who came in at almost the same time as him, his eyes were even more contemptuous. "How old are you? You should know." The foundation establishment old man swiped his hand, and a fine light flashed. Everything related to Xiao Hua was recorded in a jade slip. "Go tilde," the old man said coldly, then looked at the next cultivator. His grandmother. Xiao Hua cursed in his heart, "I'm afraid I can't pass this test. It seems that before I'm driven out of Mount Laymore, I should find an opportunity to take out that pearl and see if I can plead for leniency," Xiao Hua thought as he walked out of this side chamber. At this time, outside the side chamber, there was a long line. At the end of the line was also a side chamber. Xiao Hua was somewhat dejected. Drooping his head, he silently followed the crowd. Although the line was very long, it was also very fast. Before long, it was Xiao Hua's turn. Xiao Hua walked in. Inside, there were 4 12th layer qi refining cultivators and 1 early stage foundation establishment cultivator. They stood in the center of the side chamber, respectively. Behind them were 3 large doors. The figure of the cultivator in front of Xiao Hua disappeared into the middle door. Xiao Hua weakly walked in front of the 5 cultivators and bowed in greeting. "Junior Xiao Hua greets seniors." Those cultivators saw Xiao Hua's expression and understood. They smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist, don't be discouraged. Although you can't enter my Imperial Thunder sect, there are other sects that you can join. Fellow Daoist Xiao's 10th layer qi refining cultivation is also extremely welcomed by some sect. Many thanks for senior's consolation." Xiao Hua was somewhat spirited in advance, and walked towards the middle door. "Hihi, fellow Daoist Xiao is going the wrong way." The middle door is for those cultivators whose number of tokens isn't confirmed to be within the top 100. You should go to the left door. Outside that door is the Thunderboat. It can directly send fellow Daoist to Thunderclap Peak. A cultivator very politely reminded. "Oh, okay." Xiao Hua casually agreed. He turned around and walked towards the left door. But just as he took 2 steps, he came to his senses and said anxiously, "What? The left door leads to Thunderclap Peak?" "Yes." That cultivator smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist Xiao, there are already more than 10 10th layer and 9th layer qi refining fellow Daoists in front of you. Fellow Daoist Xiao doesn't need to feel ashamed." "Damn it," Xiao Hua said inwardly. He quickly walked back and pointed with his finger. "The right door, is it for those who can confirm to pass the 3rd trial?" "Of course." Another cultivator saw through the clues and asked curiously, "Could it be that fellow Daoist Xiao has 12 tokens?" "Of course." Xiao Hua finally felt proud and elated. He clapped his hands, and with a crash sound, a pile of tokens was thrown to the ground by this guy. He pointed with his finger and said very innocently, "Junior has 61 tokens. I don't know if I pass the trial or not." "What? 61 tokens?" Not only were the 4 12th layer qi refining cultivators flabbergasted, even the early stage foundation building cultivator was moved. That cultivator scanned with his divine sense and knew the number of tokens. His eyes flashed again and again. He glanced at Xiao Hua a few times and said to the disciple next to him in a low voice, "Why aren't you quickly collecting them? These 61 number plates are genuine." -6. Chapter 1532. TSK. One of the 4 cultivators smacked his lips and waved his hand. The pile of number plates on the ground was collected into his storage pouch. He said, That 10th layer aura refining cultivator just now was so proud of himself after getting 8 number plates. He directly called me senior marshal brother, senior marshal brother. This person is also at the 10th layer. He actually got so many number plates. I wonder, how many cultivators died in his hands in the illusion formation? Then, can Junior go through the door on the left? Xiao Hua asked weakly. Go. If you still can't go, then I'm afraid none of the cultivators participating in the third trial will be able to go. The Foundation Establishment cultivator waved his hand. A fine light flashed, and Xiao Hua's name and other information were written into the jade slip in his hand. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and leisurely walked through the door on the left. Outside the door was a corridor. In the corridor, there were several 5th and 6th layer aura refining children. When they saw Xiao Hua walk in, they all beamed with joy and raised their hands. Senior marshal brother, this way. Hee, thank you, junior marshal brother. Xiao Hua's heart was somewhat relaxed. He smiled and returned the greeting, then followed the children through the long gallery. There were many pictures in this gallery. Some were of demonic beasts, some were of cultivators, and some were of exotic flowers and plants. There were even scenes of fighting flickering with lightning. Xiao Hua looked left and right while entering the palace door at the end of the gallery. The palace gate was extremely tall and wide. After passing through the gate, there was an incomparably huge palace. At the top of the palace was a platform that was a few feet tall. It was suspended in mid-air. The platform was very large, about 30% of the entire palace. In front of the platform was a flat ground. At this moment, there were already some cultivators standing on the flat ground. The men stood on the right and the women on the left. Xue was eagerly waiting. When she saw Xiao Hua's face full of surprise, she waved her white hand in front of her chest. Xiao Hua nodded slightly, then looked at the male cultivators. Sure enough, Wang Yunxiao was already standing there. Fellow Daoist Yuan and fellow Daoist Minute also appeared as expected. Seeing Xiao Hua come over, the two looked at each other and cupped their hands. Fellow Daoist Xiao really passed. We don't know each other until we fight. In the future, we'll be fellow senior marshal brothers. Let's be more intimate. Wang Yunxiao saw fellow Daoist Minute and fellow Daoist Yuan talking together and was slightly surprised. I, Xiao Hua, formally greet you two fellow Daoist. Xiao Hua smiled and cupped his hands. Now, he was somewhat confused. Did he really pass? If his age didn't pass, then shouldn't the Foundation Establishment old man have let him in? But if his age was acceptable, why would the old man say that there was a problem with his bone age? Would he say that she was lying to him again? I Huan Yuanbo greets fellow Daoist Xiao. I am Gold City's Minute GE. Greetings to fellow Xiao. The two of them respectively saluted. Xiao Hua was able to escape from their joint attack, so his strength was definitely not something they could underestimate. In the future, they would be cultivating in the same sect, so how could they not have the intention to befriend him? Xiao Hua knew that this was the communication method of the cultivation aristocratic families. Although he felt disdain in his heart, he didn't want to slap a smiling face, so he cupped his hands and returned the greeting. Seeing that Xiao Hua wasn't too affectionate towards them, Minute GE and Yi Zichen knew that this guy still held a grudge against them for joining hands in the illusion formation. They didn't say anything else and retreated to the side, waiting for the results of the disciple selection to be announced. Closely following Xiao Hua into the main hall were several tens of people. Afterwards, no more cultivators entered. The boy who led Xiao Hua and the others enclosed the main hall's door. Xiao Hua released his perception and nodded slightly. He inwardly said, "There are a total of 64 people in this main hall. Among them, there are also some boys who were selected during the first trial of the Thunderclap Peak. These disciples in front of me are still 36 short of 100. I'm afraid that the remaining disciples will be selected from the cultivators in the middle gate." Sure enough, in the time it took to finish a meal, a deafening thunderclap resounded in the air above the palace, and it gave Xiao Hua a fright. After that, a melodious and continuous string music resounded once more, and when it entered one's ears, it caused one to be fascinated. Along with the string music, a small gate appeared on the left side of the high platform. From that gate, another 30 or so cultivators filed out. These cultivators' faces carried excitement, rejoicing, and other complicated expressions. Following the boys who led the way in front, they stood on both sides of the high platform. Fellow Taoists. He, I should call you martial nephews. A voice resounded. The thin and tall middle stage foundation establishment cultivator, Gen, appeared on the high platform. With a wave of his hand, the string music stopped abruptly. He said in a clear voice, "Congratulations on passing the disciple selection of my Imperial Thunder Sect. You are now my Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples." Hearing this, Xiao Hua felt as if a huge stone had been lifted from his heart. He let out a long sigh and bowed along with the others. He said, "Greetings to Martial Uncle General. Many thanks to Martial Uncle Gen for taking care of us. All of you rise." Gen didn't hold back. He waved his hand and said, "My Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection has always been strict. In the past, there were only a dozen or so people who could stand in front of I in the Spring Thunder Hall. Today's scene of 94 people is truly a rare sight." 94 people? Xiao Hua was slightly dazed. Didn't they say they were recruiting 100 people? Immediately after, Xiao Hua came to a realization. I'm afraid there was more than one 100th disciple. In the end, they were all eliminated. Xiao Hua's thoughts weren't wrong. Generally, the disciples of cultivation sects would take 12 or 13 number plates and give the rest of the number plates to their subordinates. Fortunately, after entering the Imperial Thunder Sect, they would have a good relationship with others and form their own forces. This way, there wouldn't be many disciples in the 90th place and the 100th place, making it easy to distinguish. Who would have thought that Xiao Hua would suddenly obtain 62 number plates, which was 50 more? Naturally, the number of cultivators ranked 100 would increase by quite a bit. It wasn't just a bit, it was a lot. As a result, the Imperial Thunder Sect, which could have recruited 6 more disciples, could only eliminate all the cultivators below the 94th disciple rank. Alright, this martial uncle won't say anything more. Although you're now my Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples, your temperament, background, aptitude, and so on still have to be tested. In the first year, you can only be considered preparatory disciples. If any disciple joins my Imperial Thunder Sect with an ulterior motive, not only will you not be able to become my Imperial Thunder Sect's official disciple, but, you won't be able to see the path down the Thunderclap Peak again. That's what I was thinking. How can you join just by passing 3 tests? So there's still a year's worth of tests. If there are spies from some sects, the Imperial Thunder Sect will find some clues during this year. Xiao Hua suddenly realized. The following matters will be divided into 2 rounds. The first round will be the sect's foundation building cultivators choosing the disciples they like. If any disciple is chosen by your master, they can directly follow their master to the Jade Archive Hall to register, then follow their master back to their cave. In the second round, this martial uncle will announce the results of the selection of the remaining disciples for the senior brothers who didn't choose any disciples to refer to, so that they can find a suitable master for each disciple. As for the disciples who didn't find a master in the end, don't worry. My Genlei Palace's Technique Imparting Hall has disciples who specialize in imparting techniques to teach you. You only need to cultivate diligently, and there will definitely be a day when you can make a name for yourself. What's going on? Xiao Hua was somewhat puzzled. How can I not find a master in the Imperial Thunder Sect? If that's the case, how is it different from cultivating outside? Oh, right. The Imperial Thunder Sect will provide cultivation techniques, medicinal pills, spirit stones, and so on. Alas, cultivation is really like the sand being washed away by the waves. It's really not easy. Just as Xiao Hua was smiling bitterly, the doors of the Spring Thunder Hall opened wide. Dozens or even hundreds of foundation building cultivators in the late stage walked in wearing different Daoist robes with different expressions. Oh my god. I'm afraid. There are hundreds of foundation building cultivators, right? Xiao Hua was dumbstruck. He had never seen so many foundation building cultivators before. Although these cultivators didn't release their pressure, that kind of aura and that kind of prestige still suppressed Xiao Hua and the others to the point that they couldn't breathe. That's right, after all, there were hundreds of almighty people who could pinch them to death at any time. Who wouldn't be careful? Greetings, seniors. The disciples felt the same as Xiao Hua. Apart from fear, they were also excited. All of them bowed in greeting. The group of foundation building cultivators didn't even look at these disciples. They slowly walked up to the high platform and released their divine senses, sweeping over these disciples again and again. Ayo, this divine sense. Xiao Hua quietly released his perception. He had already discovered that many of these divine senses were extremely similar to the divine senses he had sensed on the thunderclap peak that night. Sigh. Xiao Hua sighed. Sure enough, those divine senses didn't seem to care about Xiao Hua and just swept past him. Damn it, looks like this young master has to pass the second round, or even the third round. You guys, how can you have eyes but not recognize Jade? Xiao Hua almost wanted to stomp his feet. Haha, Jen's voice sounded. Senior brothers, I'm sure you all already have a plan in mind. Right at this moment, the hall door that had just been closed after the foundation building cultivators entered opened again. A cultivator's figure appeared at the entrance of the Spring Thunder Hall. Hey, who is this? Xiao Hua lowered his head and sighed. He didn't anxiously look up at the high platform to watch and perform. Instead, he immediately noticed that there was someone there. However, when he saw that he couldn't see through that cultivator's cultivation level, he couldn't help but be stunned. Who is this? Everyone present also noticed and raised their heads to look. Everyone on the high platform tensed up. Jen even hurriedly bowed in greeting. Martial Aunt Sun Ming, disciple greets you. Martial Aunt. Xiao Hua came to a realization. This cultivator's cultivation level is probably at the gold core stage. That cultivator entered the hall. It was actually a middle-aged female cultivator. She didn't wear a daoist robe, but rather pretty clothes. Greetings, Martial Aunt Sun Ming. When Sun Ming arrived on the high platform, over 100 foundation building cultivators all bowed in greeting. Yen, you may dispense with the formalities. With a smile on his face, Sun Ming waved his hand and said, you can continue with your work. This penniless daoist was just passing by and knew that today is a grand occasion for my Imperial Thunder sect, so I came down to take a look. -6. Chapter 1533. Yes, Martial Uncle Zun, please take a seat. Jen waved his hand and a jade chair appeared on the high platform in front of everyone. Sun Ming nodded and sat down. After Sun Ming sat down, Jen smiled and said, even Martial Uncle Sun Ming was alarmed by my Imperial Thunder Sect's grand event. It seems like today's apprenticeship ceremony will be very auspicious. Senior Martial brothers, please. We won't be polite. A red-faced middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator pointed at a disciple with a jade-like appearance and said, this child has a shallow thunder body, which is suitable for eyes hibernating thunder movement. I will take the lead. As he spoke, the disciple who was pointed out walked forward and bowed. Disciple Chang Haoyu greets master. Good, if I'm not wrong, he should be a disciple of Chang Mountain's Chang clan, right? Yes. Chang Haoyu said respectfully. Aristocratic families produce outstanding people, as expected. Let's go, follow this old man to the Jade Archive Hall. The red-faced cultivator waved his hand and smiled at Jen. Many thanks, junior martial brother Jen. Jen smiled and returned the greeting. After the red-faced cultivator saluted Sun Ming again, he brought Chang Haoyu out of the Spring Thunder Hall. Immediately after, dozens of foundation establishment cultivators stood up and pointed out the selected disciples. Besides Xiao Hua, Yuan Bo, Minute Ge, and Wang Yunxiao were also among them. Seeing everyone being picked out, Xiao Hua's heart gradually calmed down. There was a kind of transcendent feeling. All he lacked were cultivation methods and medicinal pills. In this Imperial Thunder sect, cultivation methods were needless to say, they definitely had them. But what about medicinal pills? He also had the space. When he had the chance, he would go to the Imperial Thundersect's medicine garden and find some spiritual herbs to transplant into the space. It would be best if he could find a pill refining room. It would be best if he could still refine pills and have a master to guide him. If there weren't any, wasn't there still the technique imparting disciple? From the 2nd layer to the 10th layer of qi refining, he relied on himself. What was there to be afraid of? While Xiao Hua was thinking, a beautiful middle-aged woman stood up, pointed at Xue Xue and said, "This poor Daoist has taken a fancy to this girl. Since she passed the disciple selection, this poor Daoist will take her as a disciple." Xue Xue's face was filled with surprise and joy. She walked out happily and glanced at Xiao Hua. Her eyes curved and she immediately bowed towards the high platform. Xiao Hua already knew that Xue Xue had a divine sense mark on her body, so he wasn't surprised. He only smiled. But just as Xue Xue was about to bow, a voice sounded, "Wait." Xue Xue was stunned. She bowed slightly in embarrassment, not knowing what to do. "Martial Uncle Zun?" The beautiful woman was somewhat puzzled. She turned her head and asked, "May I know what Martial Uncle wants?" "Hihi, Martial Nephew, I have something to discuss with Martial Nephew." Zun Ming stood up and pointed at Xue Xue. She smiled and said, "This old one sees that this child's physique is very compatible with this old one's cultivation method. I want to take her as my disciple. I wonder if Martial Niece is willing to part with her?" Ah! Not only was Xiao Hua stunned, even Xue Xue didn't dare to believe that this was true. Zun Ming was a gold core stage cultivator. For a qi refining stage cultivator, this was an opportunity that could only be encountered and not sought. In an instant, Xue Xue's heart jumped. Her eyes were filled with desire as she waited for the beautiful woman's answer. "Reporting to Martial Uncle, both sides are disciples of my Imperial Thunder sect. For this child to be able to receive Martial Uncle's guidance, her achievements will definitely be even higher. How can this disciple not help?" the beautiful woman said with a smile. "Good." Zun Ming clapped her hands and said, "This old one owes you a favor. If you have any matters, you can come find this old one." Disciple Xue Xue greets master. Xue Xue bowed towards Zun Ming. "Xue Xue, stand up and follow master." Zun Ming nodded with a smile. Just as she was about to wave her hand to help Xue Xue up, a loud bang sounded. The Spring Thunder Hall's door was suddenly kicked open by someone. A thin cultivator with a somewhat wrinkled Daoist robe flew in from the outside. Before that cultivator even arrived, his voice had already arrived. Jen, why didn't you send a disciple to inform this old one? This old one already saw a disciple a few days ago. This time, if I can't. HMPH, helplessness." Zun Ming frowned slightly and scolded with extreme displeasure. "Ayo, Martial Uncle Zun Ming." That cultivator called helplessness was startled. He immediately landed on the ground of the Spring Thunder Hall and bowed respectfully. "Why are you interested in coming to this Spring Thunder Hall? Why can't this old one come?" Zun Ming sneered. "If this old one didn't come, how would I know that you actually dared to fly in this Spring Thunder Hall where flying is prohibited? I'm afraid that this Spring Thunder Hall's door would also be destroyed by your kick, right?" "Good. Martial Uncle Zun Ming knows," helplessness said with a wronged expression. "When this disciple heard that there was a disciple selection 2 days ago, I specially came back from the Myriad Thunder Valley and took some time to choose a suitable disciple from the Thunderclap Peak. After that, I hurriedly returned. You should know that the Myriad Thunder Valley is of great importance. This disciple didn't dare to slack off in the slightest and put all of my attention there. Therefore, not only is my cave residence near the Myriad Thunder Valley, but I also often slack off in the selection of disciples. Beside this disciple, there is no one else who is worthy of being called a good-for-nothing disciple. This time, if I still can't find a suitable disciple, I'm afraid that this disciple's lineage will." As he said that, helplessness scanned with his divine sense. His expression immediately changed and he said angrily, Jen, where is my disciple?" Jen was very helpless. He smiled apologetically and said, "Senior Martial Brother Helplessness, It's not that I didn't want to inform you. Isn't Senior Marshal Brother already here for the selection of disciples? Junior Marshal Brother can't be following behind Senior Marshal Brother all the time and remind Senior Marshal Brother every day, right? As for which disciple you chose, this disciple also doesn't know. Furthermore, this disciple also doesn't know who took him away. I've already marked them with my divine sense. Who still dares to have ideas about my disciple? The more Helplessness spoke, the angrier he became. He directly roared. Marshal Nephew Helplessness. Zun Ming glared at him and said, You didn't even come. Who would recognize your divine sense mark? Moreover, you only came now. The other person has already been registered in the Jade Archive Hall. Even if you went to find the sect master, what reason do you have? But, this disciple has an important task for my Imperial Thunder sect, and doesn't have time to come and select disciples? Helplessness's face was bitter. He was just short of rolling his eyes. Xiao Hua stood to the side and looked very ruefully at this Foundation establishment late-stage cultivator with messy hair and stubble on his face. This person was a disciple who truly contributed to the Imperial Thunder sect. Unexpectedly, because of an important task, he didn't come in time to select a disciple. Logically speaking, this kind of cultivator who was worthy of being the pillar of the Imperial Thunder sect should have some special authority. However, from what this cultivator said, it seemed that he only had one disciple. Then, how about this old woman give her disciple to you? Zun Ming said. Don't, Marshal Aunt Zun Ming. You're a disciple of the Palace of Zun Thunder, and all your disciples are female cultivators. What would this disciple need a female disciple for? Helplessness heard this and quickly waved his hand. How about this, Senior Marshal Brother Helplessness? Jen smiled apologetically and said, The first round of selecting disciples is about to end. Senior Marshal Brother, let's see if there are any suitable candidates. Otherwise, how about the second round of selecting disciples and giving the best performance to Senior Marshal Brother as your disciple? Ah! The best performance. At the side, Xiao Hua's heart was moved. This young master got 62 number plates. I'm afraid I got the most in this round of selection, right? Could it be that I have to take this cultivator as my master? Then, Xiao Hua couldn't help but carefully size up Helplessness. Helplessness was a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator, but his messy hair had a lot of grey. His face was thin, but there were wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and on his forehead. He looked like he was over 50 years old. Looking at his daoist robe, it was also not very particular. Some places were actually a bit dirty. Then looking at the hands on his waist, they were a bit withered, the fingertips were black, and his two legs were slightly bent as he stood there. He looked very inferior to Xiao Yuhong, who used to be Shong Huaming. What? Helplessness said at this time, the good ones were all picked by that group of people. Who would want the remaining rotten cabbage? Back then, wasn't my good-for-nothing disciple. Alas, let's not talk about him. Forget it, forget it. As he spoke, he waved his hand again and prepared to leave. At this time, Zun Ming was unhappy. She scolded, Helplessness. Your Myriad Thunder Valley's lineage has a great responsibility and has always had few disciples. From Master Lei to you, it's all the same. Today, with great difficulty, you finally have so many disciples to choose from. How can you throw away your responsibility? Marshal Aunt Zun Ming, the matter of my Thunderclap Palace's Master Lei isn't something you can casually talk about. Helplessness stopped and turned around. Hee. How could I have the qualifications to talk about Master Lei? I'm just talking about Marshal Uncle Lei's matter to you. Zun Ming smiled and waved her hand again. There are so many disciples, they won't be worse than your disciple. Pick one and take it back. Your trip out of Myriad Thunder Valley won't be in vain. Fine. He helplessly halted his steps and swept his divine sense across Xiao Hua's body. Instead, his divine sense lingered on a young 9th layer Qi refining cultivator for a long time. In the end, he withdrew his divine sense and said, This poor daoist will wait for the second round. Okay, then I won't leave either. I'll stay and see if there's a disciple who's fated to be with you. Zun Ming smiled and sat down. Soon after, another dozen or so foundation establishment cultivators stood up and took away the disciples they had chosen. Then, Gen waved his hand and the early foundation establishment cultivator who had been standing below the high platform quickly stepped forward and handed over a jade slip. Gen scanned it with his divine sense and frowned. He raised his eyes and looked below the high platform. His expression was very strange. "Hey, what's wrong? Martial nephew Gen?" Zun Ming asked curiously. "Oh, nothing, nothing," Gen hurriedly said. "I'm just a little curious." Hearing this, Zun Ming sat down. She was already very happy to have met Xue today. The disciple selection was Gen Lei Palace's business. Although she was their martial uncle, she couldn't interfere with other people's business for no reason. Senior Martial Brother Helplessness. Gen turned his head and said with a bright smile, "Junior Martial Brother will now point out the number 1 disciple in this selection to Senior Martial Brother. I'm sure Senior Martial Brother will be satisfied." "Hey, really?" This time, it was Helplessness's turn to be surprised. Xiao Hua, 25 years old, late 10th layer Qi refining. In this selection, he obtained 62 tokens and ranked first among 94 disciples. Gen pointed at Xiao Hua and his voice sounded in the Spring Thunder Hall. -6. Chapter 1534. Is that so? 25 years old? Late stage of the 10th layer? Who? After hearing Gen's words, he couldn't sit still any longer. He jumped out and looked around the stage. At this moment, the cultivators in the 11th layer had already been picked out. The remaining cultivators were either in the 10th or 9th layer, and they all looked very young. Besides, in the cultivation world, who would care about someone's age? Xiao Hua was obviously in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. He was obviously 18 years old and had a slightly childish face. Some knowledgeable cultivators could tell at a glance that he had taken youth-retaining herbs. On the contrary, they wouldn't pay attention to him. That's because an 18-year-old 10th layer of the aura refining realm cultivator was already an outstanding disciple of someone else's sect. How could he come to the Imperial Thunder sect to become a disciple? You. Helplessness's gaze fell on Xiao Hua, a disciple of similar age and cultivation level. Xiao Hua was actually not slow. When he heard Gen call him, he immediately wanted to step forward. However, Helplessness's movements were even faster. Before Xiao Hua could take a step, Helplessness had already jumped out. Disciple Xiao Hua greets Senior. Xiao Hua stepped forward and bowed in respect. You. Helplessness looked at Xiao Hua with flickering eyes and asked, "Are you sure you're 25 years old?" Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. Just now, when he told the Foundation Establishment cultivator that he was 23 years old, that was counting the 3 years he spent in Yellow Flower Ridge, and the 2 years he spent in secluded cultivation. He actually completely forgot about the 2 years he spent wandering about. No wonder the other cultivator said that he was a liar. Yes, disciple is indeed 25 years old. Xiao Hua respectfully replied. Your face is so young. You must have taken youth-retaining herbs, right? Helplessness's face showed a trace of disgust. Oh, no wonder this cultivator scanned me several times with his divine sense but didn't pay attention to me. Xiao Hua understood. He then smiled apologetically and said, Disciple didn't know. When I was 18 years old, I became like this. I haven't changed at all. Helplessness's face clearly showed a trace of a smile. He nodded and said, That's good. I really hate those cultivator families' male disciples taking youth-retaining herbs. Female cultivators take them for beauty. What's the use of men being beautiful? Helpless, martial nephew. On the high platform, Zun Ming frowned and said, Hehe, this disciple is being unreasonable. Helplessly, his mood was greatly improved. After speaking to Zun Ming, he turned his head and asked, Which aristocratic family are you from? Without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, Gen, who was on the high platform, said in a clear voice, Senior Brother Helplessness, you've made a mistake this time. Xiao Hua isn't from any cultivation sect. He's a rogue cultivator. Ah! A rogue cultivator? Hearing Jen's words, not only were they helpless, even the other cultivators present, including Zun Ming, were stunned. A rogue cultivator at the 10th layer of qi refining, and at the age of 25, this was really rare in the country of Xi's cultivation world. But then, Zun Ming sighed. Sure enough, he sighed helplessly and shook his head. What a pity, Xiao Hua. If you weren't a loose cultivator, I would have accepted you as my disciple. But, you are a loose cultivator, so this old man can only reluctantly part with you. Xiao Hua was greatly surprised. He cupped his hands and said anxiously, Senior, I don't blame you for not accepting me as your disciple, but, why can't I, a loose cultivator, take Senior as my master? Senior isn't a loose cultivator, so you don't know the hardships of being a loose cultivator. Ever since I was at the 2nd layer of qi refining, I didn't have any cultivation methods or medicinal pills. I went through many difficulties to obtain some scattered cultivation methods. On one hand, I painstakingly cultivated, and on the other, I had to search for medicinal pills. Now, after spending endless effort, I finally reached the 10th layer of qi refining, and even passed the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection. Senior, just because I'm a loose cultivator, you refuse to accept me. Isn't this too cruel for me? Alas Tilda, he sighed helplessly and said, although I'm not a loose cultivator, before I entered the Imperial Thunder Sect, I was a disciple of a small cultivation aristocratic family. How could I not know the hardships of loose cultivators like you? Moreover, my previous disciple was also similar to a loose cultivator. If you say that I treat loose cultivators differently, then you're being unfair to me. Seeing the anger on Xiao Hua's face, helplessness felt as if he was looking at his former self. He sighed again and said, Didn't you say it just now? Ever since you were at the 2nd layer of qi refining, you didn't have a complete cultivation method. All of your cultivation methods were incomplete. Then let me ask you, how many cultivation methods did you change after you reached the 10th layer of qi refining? 3. Xiao Hua answered honestly. Then what about you? Helplessness suddenly asked a nearby 10th layer qi refining cultivator. Reporting to Senior, of course it's 1. That cultivator said very proudly, Junior's clan has a complete set of qi refining cultivation methods, from the 1st layer of qi refining to the 12th layer of qi refining. Xiao Hua, do you understand? Helplessness didn't explain and asked Xiao Hua somewhat pitifully. Alas, disciple understands. Xiao Hua's face was also bleak, and his tone was filled with boundless loneliness. Different cultivation methods have different methods of tempering the meridians, and the degree of tempering is also different. Using different cultivation methods to temper the meridians to the high level of qi refining, there definitely isn't a single cultivation method that tempers the meridians thoroughly from beginning to end, tempering them completely. If the meridians are like that, true qi is also like that. True qi tempered by different cultivation methods will always be impure in the end, and it's really disadvantageous for breaking through to foundation building. Excellent. On the high platform, Zun Ming also clapped her hands. What Xiao Hua said is extremely true. I didn't think that a young loose cultivator would actually have this kind of knowledge. If he wasn't already at the 10th layer of qi refining, Martial Nephew Helplessness would have definitely accepted him as a disciple. That's right, destiny makes fools of people. Xiao Hua, if you were at the 2nd layer of qi refining right now, if you were only 14 or 15 years old, but based on your comprehension ability, I would have accepted you as a disciple no matter what. Helplessness nodded. If the meridians and true qi are like that, then the realm and cultivation are even more so. What one needs to cultivate and what one needs to sharpen in one layer of a cultivation method is all fixed. And what one can't do in one layer of a cultivation method, in the next layer, one definitely has to do. There won't be anything left out. So much so that between each layer of a realm, there will be a bottleneck. This bottleneck is the absolute opportunity to sharpen one's cultivation in the current layer. If you don't break through the bottleneck and achieve the cultivation you need to achieve in this layer, then this cultivation method won't let you enter the next layer. Xiao Hua, from the 2nd layer of qi refining to the 10th layer of qi refining, do you rarely encounter bottlenecks? Yes, disciple rarely encounters bottlenecks. Xiao Hua nodded. Exactly. Because you're cultivating multiple cultivation techniques, there are flaws in every realm. Your foundation isn't solid, so your cultivation techniques shouldn't be able to advance. However, with your top-notch aptitude, these flaws are covered up. That's why you can't sense the bottleneck, and the bottleneck will appear when you break through to the foundation establishment realm. Disciple understands. Although helplessness didn't finish speaking, Xiao Hua already understood. Perhaps the bottleneck of the first 12 layers of qi refining would appear at the end, forming an insurmountable peak. Foundation building was the most difficult threshold in his life. So, Xiao Hua, don't blame me. Helplessness said apologetically. However, without waiting for helplessness to finish speaking, Zhen laughed from the high platform. Senior brother Helplessness, please wait for a moment. I still have some things I haven't read out. Helplessness rolled his eyes and said, even if you say a deluge of heavenly flowers, I only have one disciple with no future. I don't want to take in any more burdens. Zhen ignored him and read, Xiao Hua, concealed fire physique, the fire attribute is unyielding and tyrannical. In the disciple's first test, the fire attribute in his body caused the spirit of the mirror to swell and burst. Ah! Concealed fire physique. How is this possible? Helplessness was stupefied. His eyes emitted an incomparably pleasant surprise, and he almost trembled a bit. Which disciple tested this? Are you serious? Haha, I'll let junior brother know. Xiao Hua destroyed the spirit of the mirror, and it was my Zhenlei Palace's martial uncle Zhen Qing who personally verified it. This record was also personally written by martial uncle Zhen Qing. Ha ha ha. Good. Helplessness heard this and raised his head to laugh loudly. I was wondering how a loose cultivator could rely on 3 unorthodox techniques to cultivate to the 10th layer of qi refining at the age of 25. It turns out that he has the rare concealed fire physique. Moreover, the fire attribute is unyielding and tyrannical. With the help of this concealed fire physique, any bottleneck is nothing difficult. Then, this disciple Xiao Hua, do you want it? If you don't accept him, I'm afraid the other senior brothers will make a move. Zhen asked with a smile. Haha, isn't this nonsense? I have always worked hard for the Imperial Thunder Sect. I just picked a disciple, but he was snatched away by someone else. The heavens have opened their eyes this time and made this group of old things blind. This concealed fire physique, TSK, they actually made a mistake and let I take advantage of it. How can I not want a disciple given by the heavens? Disciple greets master. Xiao Hua was overjoyed when he heard this and stepped forward to bow and salute. Good disciple. Helplessly, he helped Xiao Hua up and said, you will follow master to register in the Jade Archive Hall. In the future, you can cultivate well and make my myriad Thunder Valley proud. Yes, disciple will definitely, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Good, Helplessness. Since you have accepted a disciple that you are proud of, this old woman should also leave. You and I can go to the Jade Archive Hall together. Zun Ming stood up and said. On the other side, Xue was also happy and looked at Xiao Hua with eyes full of affection. Martial uncle, please. Helplessly taking a step back, he bowed and said. However, at this time, Xiao Hua, who was full of joy, also bowed. Just as he bowed, he suddenly felt a faint catcher sound coming from inside his meridians. A medicinal liquid that was several times more spiritual fire than the fire essence flame crystal but much less pure suddenly appeared in his meridians. In a flash, his entire meridians expanded. Not good, the restriction of the clear flower pill has been broken. Xiao Hua suddenly woke up and his soul immediately flew out of his body. He no longer cared about etiquette and raised his hand to pull Helplessness in front of him and shouted, Master, save me. What? Helplessness was very displeased, but when he turned around and saw Xiao Hua's face was completely red, he was also greatly shocked. He immediately understood with a sweep of his divine sense and didn't have time to ask. His hands formed seals and seals entered Xiao Hua's body. -6. Chapter 1535. What kind of cultivation base is Wu Xian at? Wu Xian is a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. With a few hand seals, the bright flower pills in Xiao Hua's meridians immediately shackled. Why do you have? Wu Xian was shocked and asked as soon as the restriction took effect. Xiao Hua interrupted Wu Xian's question and said, "Disciple has something to report. Master, please find a quiet place." Many of the Spring Thunder Hall's disciples and cultivators on the platform had already left, but half of them were still there. How could Xiao Hua let others know? Although these cultivators were all disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect, Wu Xian's face was full of suspicion. He turned to look at Zunming, who was also puzzled, and said, "Martial Aunt Zunming, please wait in the hall for a moment. Disciple has something to ask Xiao Hua." No problem. Go ahead, I'll wait for you outside the hall." Zunming nodded with a smile, but Shui looked at Xiao Hua with worry. "Come with me." With a wave of his hand, helplessness brought Xiao Hua to a side chamber of the Spring Thunder Hall. After the time it took to smoke a cigarette, helplessness brought Xiao Hua out of the side chamber. At this moment, helplessness's face was filled with shock, ecstasy, suspicion, and confusion. As he walked, he pondered. When they arrived outside the hall, Zunming was still standing there waiting. Next to her were several cultivators who had chosen their disciples. Presumably, they were going to the Jade Archive Hall together. Wu Xian smiled bitterly and bowed. "Martial Aunt Zun, disciple, has some urgent matters. For the time being, disciple can't go to the Jade Archive Hall with Martial Aunt and the other junior brothers." What matters? Xiao Hua, is there anything suspicious? Zunming stared at Xiao Hua and asked. "This. I can't tell Martial Aunt Zun for the time being. Disciple will talk about it after disciple goes to the Heavenly Thunder Palace to see the sect master." Wu Xian's words contained a trace of excitement. Xiao Hua, who was at the side, was slightly unhappy. Earlier, he'd warned repeatedly for a long time not to reveal anything. Who knew if there were any spies from the Shonghua sect in the Imperial Thunder sect? However, if he directly said that he wanted to go to the Heavenly Thunder Palace, then he would definitely say that the head of the 8 Great Thunder Palaces, that is, the sect master of the Imperial Thunder sect, was there. How could helplessness not cause others to be surprised when he said that? Sure enough, Zunming was shocked. The several cultivators beside her were also shocked. Shui and the other disciples also had puzzled looks on their faces. Shui was even somewhat anxious. Xiao Hua shook his head slightly to signal her to be at ease, but the concern in Shui's eyes didn't lessen at all. Helplessness naturally had its own reasons. When Zunming and the others heard that it was the Heavenly Thunder Hall, they did not ask any further questions. Although they had looks of shock on their faces, they still smiled and said, "Then you had better hurry and go. For such an important matter, if you do not have the sect master's approval, you must not reveal it to us." "Many thanks, Martial Uncle Zunming." Helplessly, he bowed in greeting. With a wave of his hand, he pulled Xiao Hua to his side. However, a light thunderclap could be heard in mid-air. Helplessly, he executed the lightning escape and flew far away. Martial nephews, let's go to the Jade Archive Hall." Zunming glanced at helplessness, who was running away in a hurry, and led everyone to the Jade Archive Hall. Shui walked at the back, looking at the sky with worry. Although the lightning escape was fast, the Leimo mountain range was indeed very big. From the Zhenlei Palace to the Heavenly Thunder Palace, it took them almost the time to eat a meal. Damn it, this is really too big, isn't it? Xiao Hua followed helplessness and flew. He did not reveal a single trace of transcendence energy. Seeing that helplessness was flying several times faster than him, he could not help but be shocked by the strength of the Imperial Thunder sect. However, he was immediately dumbfounded. This is the Imperial Thunder sect that is second only to the 3 great sects of Xiuzhen. It is on the same level as the Huanhua sect. How could their sect be small? Take Shong Huaming as an example. If the entire Yellow Flower Ridge was taken out, It might not be smaller than the Imperial Thunder Sect. Looking at the enormous mountain peak, Xiao Hua realized that there was actually a palace that was even more majestic than the Zhenlei Palace. It had a grandeur that was even more dazzling than the Zhenlei Palace. Xiao Hua knew that this was most likely the Zhenlei Palace. Sure enough, he heard Helplessness say in a low voice, "Xiao Hua, this is the Thunder Immortal Peak where the sect leader of the Imperial Thunder Sect, Zhenlei Zi, resides. The Heavenly Thunder Palace is just ahead." As he said that, he helplessly pointed at the group of palaces, before continuing, "When we reach the Great Thunder Hall, you must clearly tell the sect master everything that you have said to this old man earlier. Senior Martial Brother Chen Qinghua is a disciple of the Heavenly Thunder Palace and is from the sect leader's branch. He is also my junior Martial Brother. I did not expect such a thing to happen. Alas, you have contributed so much to my Imperial Thunder Sect. I'm afraid you will be taken into the Heavenly Thunder Palace by the sect leader. This is also the reason why I did not bring you to the Jade Archive Hall." "Hehe, Master, I called you Master just now. How can I go back on my words now?" Xiao Hua said with a smile. "You are thinking too much." A hint of joy flashed through Helplessness's eyes, but he immediately shook his head. "My Myriad Thunder Valley has always had a hard time. Their cultivation is not particularly outstanding and the disciples they teach are also mediocre. Your hidden fire physique is buried in my Myriad Thunder Valley. Alright, let's not talk about this. It won't be too late to talk about it when we reach the Great Thunder Palace." Helplessness waved his hand slightly and landed in front of a palace. This palace was different from the Spring Thunder Palace of the Imperial Thunder Palace. In front of the door was a Peak Chi refining disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect guarding. Seeing Helplessness approach, he walked forward and cupped his hands. "Martial Uncle, which palace have you come to? The Great Thunder Palace. Please report your name." "I am Helplessness of the Shocking Thunder Palace's Myriad Thunder Valley. Today I have brought Xiao Hua to see the sect leader. I have an extremely urgent matter to report." Helplessness returned the salute and said, "Alright, Martial Uncle knows that the sect leader is not in the Great Thunder Palace right now. Only Martial Ancestor Miu of the Conlei Palace is on guard. How about this disciple report to Martial Ancestor now?" That disciple said with a smile. "This is the only way." Helplessness wrinkled his brows and slapped his hand, taking out a waste tablet from his storage pouch and handing it over. "This is my waste tablet. I would like to trouble Martial Nephew to report to Martial Ancestor." That disciple took Helplessness's waste tablet and went in. However, after a short while, he returned and said helplessly, "Martial Ancestor Miu invites Martial Uncle to speak in the palace." "Alright." Helplessness took the waste tablet and didn't say anything else. He waved his hand and was about to bring Xiao Hua in. "Martial Uncle." That disciple extended his hand, stopping Xiao Hua as he said very discontentedly, "Martial Uncle, don't forget, aura refining disciples are not allowed to enter Colossal Thunder Hall unless they are summoned by the Palace Lord on duty." Helplessness slapped his forehead and said very regretfully, "Look at me. I should have explained it just now. How about this, Martial Nephew, please report to Martial Ancestor again. This is the new disciple who passed the selection this time, Xiao Hua." Helplessness had no choice but to say it again. "Helplessness. Why did you come to the Great Thunder Palace instead of guarding the Myriad Thunder Valley?" Just as Helplessness was explaining, a melodious voice came from midair. "Hey, this voice is somewhat familiar." Xiao Hua didn't think he knew any senior from the Imperial Thunder Sect. However, when he really looked up, he couldn't help but stare blankly. He saw a cultivator flying in midair. That cultivator looked very young and had an ordinary appearance. However, his complexion was somewhat red and the only thing that was somewhat confusing was his sparse eyebrows. Wasn't this the mysterious cultivator Xiao Hua met in front of the Thunder Accumulation Cave whose cultivation was unknown? That cultivator descended from midair. Helplessness hurriedly went forward and saluted, saying, "Helplessness greets Martial Ancestor Lei Meng." "Martial Ancestor Lei Meng? Thunder Meng Daoist." Hearing this, Xiao Hua immediately remembered what Zun Ming said in the Spring Thunder Palace. Get up. What are you doing here? Thunder Meng Daoist waved his hand and helped helplessness up. He casually glanced at Xiao Hua and turned his head to ask helplessness. However, just as he finished speaking, Thunder Meng Daoist seemed to remember something and turned his head to ask Xiao Hua, "You seem to be that loose cultivator from the thunder accumulation cave, called Xiao Hua, right?" Hearing this, Xiao Hua's heart was filled with joy. He didn't expect that a nascent soul senior would actually remember him, a small loose cultivator at the second level of qi refining. He immediately stepped forward and saluted. "Disciple Xiao Hua greets martial ancestor." "Martial ancestor?" Thunder Meng Daoist was slightly stunned. Helplessness, who was beside him, felt that his brain wasn't enough. He muttered, "Martial ancestor, you know Xiao Hua? He's a disciple who passed this time's selection and was accepted by me as a disciple." "Hey! You passed the disciple selection?" Thunder Meng Daoist was stunned. Looking at Xiao Hua's cultivation, he was even more shocked. "Xiao Hua, it's only been 3 years. You actually went from the second level of qi refining to the 10th level of qi refining? This is bad." Xiao Hua complained in his heart. Although this person was already his master, but going from the second level of qi refining to the 10th level of qi refining, this kind of unimaginable cultivation was something that could only happen in a dream. How could he dare to let this kind of thing happen to him? Xiao Hua promptly saluted and said, "Yes, Martial Ancestor knows." That day, Junior was a bit secretive from Martial Ancestor. At that time, Disciple's cultivation was damaged. Although my cultivation was at the 9th level of qi refining, I could only use the magic power of the 3rd level of qi refining. I'm afraid that Martial Ancestor misunderstood. "Oh, so it's like this. I was wondering why I felt that your magic power was much higher than others of the same level. So it's like this." Thunder Meng Daoist nodded. In the eyes of a nascent soul cultivator like him, qi refining cultivators were like infants. How could an adult accurately distinguish the strength of an infant? "Hihi, then you're also not a loose cultivator, right?" Thunder Meng Daoist didn't care about Xiao Hua's concealment and laughed. "Disciple is indeed a loose cultivator. That day in the thunder accumulation cave, I really wanted to join Tian Qi and do some things." Xiao Hua almost wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. That day, Martial Ancestor evaluated Disciple's cultivation. Disciple didn't know how to explain, so, "Hehe, no matter. That day, you and I didn't know each other. I only saw that your cultivation was not bad, so I casually evaluated you. You can't take it seriously. However, I didn't expect that today you would actually enter my Imperial Thunder Sect and even become a disciple of my Thunderous Palace. You and this old man do have some fate," Thunder Meng Daoist said with a smile, still looking like the senior who helped Xiao Hua that day in the Thunder Accumulation Cave. "Martial Ancestor." "Yes, Martial Ancestor knows. This time, Xiao Hua has come to the Great Thunder Hall to report to the sect master." At the side, seeing the two people actually starting to reminisce about old times, at the same time he was happy in his heart, he was also somewhat anxious. -6. Chapter 1536. "Oh, that's right. Xiao Hua, what business do you have with Wu Hen?" Thunder Meng Daoist nodded. "Grandmaster, please lay down the silence talisman." Xiao Hua bowed and said. "Oh." Thunder Meng Daoist waved his hand and laid down a silence talisman restriction. He smiled and said, "You're quite cautious, just like you were at the Thunder Accumulation Cave." However, when Xiao Hua said the 3 words Qian Qing Hua, Thunder Meng Daoist's expression changed greatly. He waved his hand and said, "Xiao Hua, who did you tell about this matter?" "Yes, Grandmaster knows. Disciple has only told Master. I didn't reveal a single word to anyone else," Xiao Hua said respectfully. Good. Thunder Meng Daoist said good 3 times in a row. He waved his hand and the silence talisman restriction instantly shattered. "You don't need to repeat such an important matter a second time. You should personally report to Sect Master. Sect Master is temporarily not in the Great Thunder Hall. Xiao Hua said helplessly. Hehe, that's easy. Thunder Meng Daoist waved his hand and used the thunder light sound transmission technique. A bolt of lightning rapidly flew towards a place on the Thunder Immortal Peak. Thunder Meng Daoist looked at Xiao Hua. The more he looked at him, the more he liked him. He said very amiably, "Yes, I'll listen to Grandmaster's instructions." Xiao Hua already had a good impression of Thunder Meng Daoist. Now that he had become his grand disciple, he was satisfied and replied respectfully. The person at the side looked on helplessly and rejoiced in his heart. He thought to himself, from the looks of it, it seems that Grandmaster has a very good impression of this Xiao Hua. Fortunately, I accepted Xiao Hua as my disciple earlier. Otherwise, wouldn't Xiao Hua have become my martial uncle? Rumble, rumble, rumble. Several figures flew out from somewhere on the Thunder Immortal Peak. Like rolling thunder, they quickly rushed to the front of the Great Thunder Hall. When they appeared, they were Master Chen Lazy, Fairy Shen Hua, and the others. Master Chen Lazy's face was full of joy. He had already spread out his divine sense from far away and firmly locked onto the unfamiliar Xiao Hua. When they came close, Master Chen Lazy's eyes that contained thunder light swept over Xiao Hua, full of pressure. My goodness, this is a master who is even more powerful than Lei Meng Zhenren. Xiao Hua's heart trembled, and he hurriedly bowed in greeting, but he was still too late. Lei Meng Daoist and Wu Hen had already bowed, and Wu Hen respectfully said, "Myriad Thunder Valleys Wu Hen greets Sovereign." Fortunately, Xiao Hua's disciple Xiao Hua greets Sovereign was heard clearly by Chen Laizi. Disciple? Chen Laizi was a bit surprised, but then he laughed, "Ha ha ha, Chen Qinghua is smart for once." Then, he turned to instruct the disciples of Great Thunder Hall, "Go, call Palace Master Zhen Sheng of Great Thunder Hall over. This guy has also made a great contribution." The disciple nodded and immediately sent a message. Chen Laizi waved his hand and said, "Let's go, Xiao Hua. We'll talk inside." "Yes," disciple obeys. Xiao Hua bowed respectfully and hid behind Wu Hai. Chen Laizi and the others naturally went in first, while Helpless and Xiao Hua walked at the back. Don't be fooled by Helpless' arrogance in the Spring Thunder Hall. Here, he was extremely respectful, even more careful than Xiao Hua. The style of the Great Thunder Palace was not much different from the Spring Thunder Palace, except that the interior of the palace was much larger. Two incomparably huge pillars supported the roof of the palace. Lightning was lingering on the pillars, and countless strange patterns were emerging one after another. The surrounding jade walls and the roof of the palace were also filled with purple talismans that were faintly swimming about, displaying their endless means. Great Thunder Hall didn't have a high platform, but there were 8 praying mats floating in the air. Chen Laizi and the other palace masters sat on their own praying mats. Chen Laizi waved his hand, and a light purple thunderbolt gathered on the pillar in the center of the hall. The pillar emitted a tricolored brilliance, and the brilliance went straight up the pillar. After rushing to the roof of the hall, it quickly spread in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, covered the entire hall. "Xiao Hua, tell me about your encounter with Qinghua." Chen Laizi was very calm, and after seeing that the restriction of the Great Thunder Hall had taken effect, he slowly asked. "Yes, disciple." Xiao Hua took a step forward. Although there was some fear in his heart, he suppressed his excitement and prepared to report. "Sect Master, why don't we wait for Zhen Sheng and Dui Jie to come first?" This child deliberately wanted to contribute to the sect, and thought of the method of recruiting disciples, but he was scolded by you. If he didn't hear it with his own ears, how could he be at ease? Fairy Shen Hua said with a light smile. "When did I scold them?" Chen Laizi's mood was very good, and he said with a smile, "That day, I even encouraged him to recruit a few more disciples." "Xiao Hua, what did Chen Qinghua ask you to bring back?" Seeing that Chen Laizi didn't ask, Thunder Talisman Spiritual Master didn't ask. Xiao Hua would be his direct disciple in the future, so there was no need to be polite. Chen Laizi wasn't in a hurry. Hearing Thunder Talisman Spiritual Master's question, his ears perked up and his eyes contained a trace of expectation as he looked at Xiao Hua. Seeing the 6 nascent soul cultivators looking at him with 12 pairs of eyes, although there was no pressure, cold sweat gradually dripped down from Xiaohua's forehead. Damn, this nascent soul cultivator is really powerful. Just his gaze alone can kill me, a qi condensation cultivator. Xiaohua secretly sighed. He patted his hand and took out the bead from his storage bag. When the bead was taken out from the storage pouch, countless tiny purple lightning bolts immediately flashed. The lightning bolts lingered around the bead and gradually grew larger. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, the 4 walls of the enormous Thunder Palace, the roof of the palace and the 2 giant pillars simultaneously flickered in sync with the lightning bolts surrounding the bead. With a flash, the lightning gathered around the bead and was absorbed by the bead at a speed visible to the naked eye. This wasn't the end. Immediately after, the second wave of lightning appeared and was also absorbed by the bead. Ah! Thunder-devouring bead. Seeing this, Chen Leizi and the others revealed extremely shocked expressions. Xiaohua only heard their voices. His eyes blurred and his hand became lighter. The thunder-devouring bead in his hand disappeared. Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He secretly touched the cold sweat on his forehead and looked at Chen Leizi, who was floating in the air with the thunder-devouring bead in his hand. At this moment, Chen Leizi's face was filled with shock, surprise, and shock. At this moment, the thunder-devouring bead that was flickering with purple lightning was blocked by an invisible barrier, and the lightning couldn't escape from Master Chen Lei's palm in the slightest. At this moment, the barrier around the Great Thunder Palace had returned to its previous state, and one couldn't see any difference. Lei Tan Daoist and the others were like Chen Leizi. They could no longer sit still. Their bodies floated up and surrounded Chen Leizi. Their eyes were fixed on the lightning-devouring bead. The lightning-devouring bead was reflected in their eyes. After a while, Master Chen Lei waved his hand, and another thunderbolt hit the pillar. The same tricolored light flashed, and Xiaohua was a bit confused. At this moment, Chen Leizi lowered his head and said, "Xiaohua, I have some difficulties. There's something I need to tell you." Xiaohua was stunned. He bowed and said, "Sect Master, please tell me what you need." "This thing is indeed brought back by Senior Uncle Chen Qinghua. There's nothing else." "Haha, good boy, I'm not talking about this." Chen Leizi smiled and said, "Qinghua hasn't returned to the Thunder Controlling Sect, and his spirit tablet hasn't been damaged. As far as I know, he has probably used the soul concealing technique, which is a secret technique of our sect, to hide all of his life force and aura. I'm sure you know that the Shonghua sect, Xuanyan School, and Seven Skills sect are still looking for him." Hearing this, Xiaohua understood. Without any hesitation, he said with a smile, "Sect Master, please don't worry. Since I've already come to the Imperial Thunder sect, I've already offended the 3 sects. Besides, I'm now a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Why should I be afraid of them? Even if they have some dirty tricks up their sleeves, how can I not trust Sect Master?" "Good, good, good." Chen Leizi shouted 3 times in a row, then clapped his hands. Instantly, the restrictive spells around the thunder-devouring bead were broken, and the lightning bolts hovering around the thunder-devouring bead were enlarged once again. At the same time, because the restrictive spells of the huge Thunder Palace were no longer isolated, countless dark clouds suddenly appeared in the sky above the Thunder Immortal Peak and the Thunder Mo mountain range. Strands of lightning bolts were flashing in the dark clouds, like swimming pythons, which were accumulating power to strike down at the huge Thunder Palace. Moreover, it was unknown just how many restrictions within the Thunder Core mountain range were also beginning to shine with brilliance following the appearance of the dark clouds. Numerous runes gradually flickered, gradually converging into threads of lightning, just like the restrictions of the colossal Thunder Palace, eagerly about to be thrown into the extremely distant thunder-devouring orb. Alas, I was lucky. Chen Leizi let out a long sigh. He waved his hand and an extremely powerful seal surrounded the thunder-devouring bead. As the lightning from the thunder-devouring bead retracted, the seal around the Thunder Mo mountain range returned to normal. The dark clouds above the mountain range also gradually disappeared. At the foot of the Thunder Mo mountain range, Many disciples of the splendid sect, Xuanyan school, and Chiqiao sect didn't relax their vigilance just because the Imperial Thunder sect's disciple selection was over. Less than 100 li away from the Thunder Mo mountain range, several late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators were sitting cross-legged at the foot of a tall mountain. Two of them were the male and female cultivators from the splendid sect that Xiao Hua met in Shihuang town. Similarly, the male cultivator looked at the peaceful scene and raised his voice. Junior Marshal Sister Qi, is there any news from the Sky Thunder Peak? Senior Marshal Brother Gao, in the past few days, only those who didn't pass the Imperial Thunder Sect's test went down the mountain. What news could there be? They didn't even stop Xiao Hua from going up the mountain. If that Xiao Hua really went up the mountain, how could he be so stupid as to go down the mountain again? Junior Marshal Sister Qi's complexion wasn't good. Needless to say, Junior Marshal Sister Qi and Senior Marshal Brother Gao did stop Xiao Hua in Shihuang town that day. However, they didn't find any trace of the thunder-devouring bead on Xiao Hua's body, so they easily let him go. Later, things changed, especially when Xiao Hua strangely escaped from the hands of the three sects' Foundation establishment cultivators. This made the splendid sect realize that Xiao Hua was different. Senior Marshal Brother Gao and Junior Marshal Sister Qi didn't dare to hide the matter and reported it to the splendid sect's master. When he heard that Xiao Hua was stopped by his own disciples, the splendid sect's master almost flew into a rage. Therefore, these two unlucky late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators were naturally sent to the foot of the mountain to atone for their crimes. 6. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.